The House will come to order. Prayer by the chaplain.
What does prayer do for all of you who are here to make our state better? There's a prayer that says, prayer may not bring water to parched fields, nor mend a broken bridge, nor rebuild a ruined city. But prayer can water an arid soul, mend a broken heart, and rebuild a weakened will, so that you all can legislate to bring water to parched fields and mend a broken bridge and rebuild a ruined city. That's your job. That is your job, to bring water, nourishment, care, to make sure that our city, that all of you work towards the common good to make Minnesota the great state we want it to be. To build a bridge, to build something to make sure that the divide does not stop the work of legislation, of policy that brings the hopes and dreams of each of your constituents, of each and every one of your cities, in each and every one of your family, friends, and neighbors. And then to rebuild a ruined city. It doesn't matter if your city is outstate Minnesota or right here in Minneapolis and St. Paul. It doesn't matter where your city is, because we are one state. And it is that work that you have been elected to do. And so now, go forth. Go forth to water arid soil, mend broken bridges, and rebuild ruined cities, so that all of us in Minnesota can truly water our arid souls, mend our broken hearts, and rebuild our weakened wills. Oseh shalom bimromav hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'al kol yoshvei tevel v'imru amen. May the source of peace bring peace to each and every one of us, to our world, to this very work that you are here to do, as we say, amen.
The chaplain for today is Rabbi Marcia Zimmerman from Temple Israel in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and the wife of our own State Representative Frank Hornstein. Pledge of Allegiance. Please remain standing and recite the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The clerk will take the roll.
The index cards are great. Thanks for being here.
Will the clerk please call the name of the member who is participating remotely?
Agbadje.
Go ahead.
Agbadje, present.
Try again.
Agbadje, present.
Agbadje.
One more time.
Agbadje, present.
Agbadje, present.
The clerk will close the roll.
You know me, I want to do it. Thank you.
A quorum is present. The clerk will read the journal of the preceding day.
Journal of the House, 93rd Session, 2023, 20th day, St. Paul, Minnesota, Thursday, February 9th, 2023.
If there is no objection, further reading of the journal will be dispensed with, and the journal will be approved as corrected by the chief clerk. Hearing no objection, the journal is approved as corrected by the chief clerk. Members, please take your conversations off of the House floor. It's designed for good acoustics, so we can hear your conversations in here very, very well. So please take your conversations off of the House floor into the retiring room or into the alcoves or out into the rotunda. Reports of standing committees and divisions. A copy of this order of business is on your desk and online. If there is no objection, the reports will be adopted. Representative Demuth.
Thank you, Speaker Hortman. I request a separate vote be taken on the committee report relating to House File 2, and I would request a roll call.
Representative Demuth requests a separate vote on House File 2 and requests a roll call. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. First, we will take the vote on all of the other reports. Hearing no objection, the reports are adopted. So we will now proceed to act on the committee report for House File 2. Is there any discussion? Representative Demuth.
Thank you, Speaker Hortman. And members, House File 2 establishes a state-operated paid family and medical leave program paid for by new taxes on employers and employees. We know this bill has already had 5 hearings in different finance committees, but there has not been a fiscal note, wow, a fiscal note for any of those hearings. For any members of the public watching, fiscal notes are the document that we get that shows what a bill costs, which agencies those costs will be to. In past sessions, fiscal notes for a bill nearly identical to this showed costs to DEED, the Department of Human Services, DOLI, MMB, the Supreme Court, the legislature, and the University of Minnesota. It explained that this program would require over 300 new full-time employees in state government. The fiscal note showed around $400 million in new state spending each year. We have none of that information yet for this year's bill. We don't know if this bill impacts more or fewer agencies. We don't know if the cost of the bill will be higher or lower. We don't know if the state will need to hire more or fewer employees to operate the program. So let's be clear. Finance committees cannot fully discuss the financial impacts of bills without fiscal notes. There is no way the Workforce Development Committee, which heard the bill on January 25th, could fully vet the impacts of this bill on DEED. There's no way the Judiciary Finance Committee, which heard the bill on January 31st, could fully vet the bill with knowing the impact to the courts. And there's no way the Labor and Industry Finance Committee, which heard the bill on February 7th, could fully vet the bill without knowing the impact to the Department of Labor and Industry. They simply don't have all of the information to discuss. This session, we've been moving at lightning speed, and I know my friends across the aisle seem to be thrilled about that. But when we move that fast, we make mistakes. We miss problems with bills, and it's disrespectful to our legislative process and disrespectful to the public. Putting our policy differences aside, and we definitely disagree plenty about the policy of this bill and how it will negatively impact Minnesota businesses, we need to follow the process that this body has used for decades. There are more than 3 months left in this session. There's enough time to fully vet House File 2 and all of the bills that are moving this session. There's enough time to discuss both the financial and the policy impacts of all of the legislation moving and still get it done before we adjourn in May. We need to object to this committee report and send it back to the Labor and Industry Finance Committee. This bill should not continue moving at lightning speed while members don't have all of the information. I would request that members vote no on adopting this committee report.
The member from Candy Ojai, Representative Baker.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. I also want to address this issue. This massive workforce mandate is coming at us, and it's huge, it's complex, it's supposed to fit every single business in the state of Minnesota. It's going to affect our counties, our cities, our nonprofits, everybody that has an employee. This is a big deal. I'm honored to be the ranking member on the House Workforce Committee, along with Chair Zhang. We had a robust conversation about this bill late in January, and we did not have enough time to kind of set this stage up. Also, of course, the fiscal note was not present. Commissioner Grove was there, gave us a 3-4 minute overview of how great this bill was, but we weren't able to ask him questions because the testifiers kind of took up most of that time, and the commissioner had to leave that meeting. He wasn't around for that. My question would be this simply, and Madam Speaker, if I could ask Representative Zhang for a question, to yield to a question.
He will yield. Representative Baker.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And to Chair Zhang, this is something, again, I appreciated your work in committee that day. As I mentioned, this is the most important bill that our committee can hear this year. It's tough to get a lot of things worked through with 90 minutes, and you did actually extend it another 10 minutes for us, which I appreciate that. Now, if we have a fiscal note, Chair Zhang, and if this new fiscal note that will come out, if it has part of our jurisdiction that hits the Workforce Committee, Chair Zhang, are you able to commit that we're going to send it back to our committee if it does, in fact, touch our jurisdiction with this important bill?
The member from Ramsey, Representative Zhang.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Lead Baker, for that question. I will have a conversation with the author of the bill and you about that as we proceed.
Representative Baker.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and Chair Zhang. I hope that the conversation goes better. A lot of us are having a tough time getting to the author of the bill to have a meeting and to try to talk about some of these things. I do have one later this week, and I appreciate Representative Richardson allowing us to try to get a few minutes during committee to try to talk about this. But it has been a challenge to reach out and get discussions about this important bill. So again, I heard you say you're going to talk to the author about this, but it's not the author's responsibility, Chair Zhang. It's your responsibility as the chair. It's my responsibility as the ranking member to make sure our committee work is done right. And I really hope that you take my advice on this, and I hope that we can bring it back to our committee. If it affects our jurisdiction on that bill, I really hope that we do the right thing and do this. So members, this is important discussion. This is how we write good legislation, is to vet it properly in a finance committee, and everywhere that finance committee touches that bill, we have to address this. So I'm going to count on the good chair to make sure he does the right thing and have this come back if it does indeed touch our department there, so our committee. So appreciate that. I look forward to further conversation. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The member from Anoka, Representative Scott.
Thank you, Speaker Hortman and members. And we, too, heard House File 2 and Judiciary, where I'm the Republican lead. And we heard it on January 31st. We debated the bill for about 40 minutes. And the bill's author, I talked to her prior to the hearing, and she was kind enough to take a small provision amendment that provided some limited protections for employers who act in good faith. But members, looking at the fiscal note from this bill last year, there were costs to the judiciary, and I'm concerned that the fiscal note this session will be similar to the one last year, and it will have impacts to the court. And I'm wondering if Chair Becker-Finn would yield to a question, Madam Speaker.
She will yield. Representative Scott.
Thank you, Speaker Hortman and Chair Becker-Finn. Same question that was asked before of Chair Zhang. Just wondering if the fiscal note, when and if there is a cost to the judiciary, will you be asking for the bill to come back to your committee so that we can discuss the fiscal impact?
Representative Becker-Finn.
Thank you, Speaker. As a chair, it depends. We'd have to take a look at it, and there are all kinds of factors that go into the decisions that I make as a chair. But thank you for asking.
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Speaker Hortman. So Representative Becker-Finn, if she would continue to yield.
She will yield. Representative Scott.
Thank you. So Representative Becker-Finn, if the fiscal note shows at least the amount that it did last time, will you be bringing it back to the Judiciary Committee?
Representative Becker-Finn.
Thank you, Speaker. Again, it depends. There are a lot of factors that go into whether I call something back to my committee or not.
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Speaker Hortman. If she would continue to yield.
Hold on just a second. Representative Becker-Finn, will you yield to another question? She will yield. Representative Scott.
Thank you, Speaker Hortman. And Representative Chair Becker-Finn, what factor would kind of put you over the top on whether to hear it again in the committee?
Representative Becker-Finn.
Thank you, Speaker. Again, it depends. There are a lot of different factors that go into the choices that you make as a chair. I couldn't speak to just one factor or another. You never know what's going to happen. We kind of have to look at a lot of things and weigh what makes the most sense for our committee.
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Speaker Hortman and Representative Becker-Finn. I'm sorry we can't get any more concrete answers than what we're getting from the chairs of these committees. We have a lot of really important and big bills that have been passing through at the speed of light, and many of them are not well vetted. Some of them are traveling through this process, the committee process, without fiscal notes, which is, in my opinion, very irresponsible. I can see maybe one committee or two waiting for that fiscal note, but when you continue to push these fiscal notes through each committee without having, or when you're processing these bills through committee with no fiscal notes, it is the responsible thing to do is to bring them back to those committees once the fiscal note arrives if there is a fiscal cost in that committee's purview. And so I'm really sorry that we can't get a more concrete answer that yes, definitely, we will be bringing this back to the Judiciary Committee or the Workforce Committee or whatever committee is touched, this bill will be touching. It's disappointing that we can't get a concrete answer out of our committee chairs because they have the authority to say one way or the other on the floor right now, today, that yes, if there's a fiscal cost to the Judiciary Committee, I have the authority as chair, yes, most definitely we'll be bringing it back to the committee, even if it's for 5 minutes. Thank you, members.
The member from Rice, Representative Daniels.
Thank you, Speaker and members. We heard House File 2 in our Children and Families Committees on February 2nd, and we did not have a fiscal note either. Because of that issue, we made a motion to the bill, which failed. However, our concerns, we're still fast-tracking the bill without having the facts about the bill to discuss it. Looking for the fiscal note from the similar bill that was discussed last season, there were costs to the Department of Human Services related to CCAP. My concern was the fiscal note this session probably would be similar cost to the impact of CCAP. And yet we've vetted in children and families, and I would ask Chair Pinto if he would yield for a question.
He will yield. Representative Daniels.
Representative Pinto, would you commit to that when we have a fiscal note that shows a cost for DHS related to CCAP, which is within our committee's jurisdiction, would you demand the bill come back to our committee so we can further discuss it?
Representative Pinto.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm definitely not in the usual position of demanding things of the Speaker or of the body, Representative Daniels. I remember your motion to table, and I remember that it came after I had actually allocated twice as much time for that hearing of that bill than we had talked about and had been committed to members, and actually went twice as long at that point, something that came that motion to table. Representative Daniels, I'm certainly open to, well, we'll see where things go, but it was not my understanding that there'd be any fiscal impact in our committee, and I'll keep an eye on where things go, but I'm not at this time prepared to make any sort of commitments to Representative Daniels.
Representative Daniels.
Thank you, Chair Pinto, for that response. I just really hope you'd give us a definite answer. This is a big bill. I've talked to numerous people in my district, and this will affect everybody from government to schools to restaurants to you name it. And it's a huge ask. It's a tax increase. The bill's not very well thought out. That reduces it down to one person for that to take effect. So I would just strongly reconsider bringing these bills back so they can be discussed again, because it has such a large impact on the state. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The member from Wright, Representative McDonald.
Madam Speaker and members, we too heard House File 2 in Labor and Industry on last Tuesday, the 7th. We had several amendments that unfortunately the chair and the rest of the Democrats on the committee rejected. One particularly amendment we thought was very important, and I probably think that you'll agree with me. It was an amendment that would have this program audited within a year. You're probably familiar with MnSure, MnLARS, Southwest Light Rail, et cetera, that cost, they were very big bills and cost hundreds of millions of dollars, and we had them audited. Thanks be to God we had them audited, but we found some great deficiencies. But unfortunately, they rejected, the Labor and Industry Committee rejected the auditing that we wanted to ensure to make sure this paid family sick leave will do exactly what you want it to do. It's going to be one of the largest bills that we'll see in this committee or in this session. And it's completely irresponsible to bring such a bill with no fiscal note whatsoever. Members, I want to pledge to you, as long as I sit in this body, I will not bring a bill to you and force or ask you to vote for a bill that has no fiscal note. That is one of the most irresponsible things to do. Let's say you're going to build a house. You have a builder coming in, and he's going to build a house, and he's not even going to tell you what it's going to cost. You just say, build away, I'll pay you when it's done. That is a stupid thing to do, and it's irresponsible. So members, you new members that are here, both on our side and your side, as you continue to see these bills with no fiscal note, don't vote for them. It's an irresponsible thing to do. Last year during Labor and Committee, I was on that as well. We had a fiscal note then. It's a new bill this year, but it would have over 300 new full-time employees. We know it's going to be a great cost. It's going to be a great cost, Representative Nelson, to the Department of Labor and Industry. That's our committee. It's a finance committee. Imagine bringing a bill to a finance committee and you have no cost. And now it's been through 4 or 5 committees and still no fiscal note. I heard over the weekend from a senator that there are some bills going to the governor's office and he's signing them, not knowing what it cost. Can you imagine such a thing? It's ludicrous. So I would like, Chair Nelson, I see you're back on the House floor. Thanks for coming back when I pulled you out of the restroom there. Would you yield for a question, please?
Representative Nelson will yield. Representative McDonald.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. No, I didn't pull him from there. I just told him I was going to ask him a question.
Way too much information,
Yeah.
Representative McDonald.
All right. Well, Representative Nelson, would you commit to our group, and to be the responsible one, that once it has a fiscal note, heaven forbid, I think we'll have a fiscal note before it gets out of all the committees, would you commit to having it come back to our committee so we can discuss it and share with the rest of the committee members the fiscal note?
Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Representative McDonald. I'm not going to make any commitments because I don't know what the fiscal note's going to say. I don't know what it's going to do. We heard it in our committee and passed it on to the next committee that it's being moved here to another finance committee. And hopefully before it gets to the floor here, it does have a fiscal note attached to it.
Representative McDonald.
Madam Speaker, did you hear that? Now, first of all, I do want to say that Representative Nelson is a really good chairman. He gives us ample time to ask questions. He doesn't hurry us up. We've heard the debate last week that some of the committee hearings they have limited time to discuss, especially the minority. But I want to give you a compliment, Representative Nelson, because you certainly are very respectful to the minority and give us ample time to ask questions and give our amendments. But did you hear that? He says he's not going to commit to something in which he doesn't know about with the fiscal note. Well, Representative Nelson, that's just irresponsible. That's silly to say you can't commit because you don't know what the fiscal note would do or say. Think about that. Think about the words we use. I can't commit to a fiscal note because we don't know what it'll say or do. Isn't that our responsibility? So, Representative Nelson, I know you're a good man and you'll do the right fiscal, responsible thing, and perhaps we'll see a physical fiscal note someday in committee. So, members, I appreciate your listening to a very important discussion about the cost of your bill. The cost that you're going to give to counties, cities, schools, unions, businesses, and every employee in the state of Minnesota. Think about it. Madam Chair.
Yep, and members, just please keep in mind to debate the movement of the bill or not, and not the particular personalities involved in the movement of the bill. The member from Carver, Representative Nash.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, I have been on the State Government Finance Committee since I got here. And in a giant nerdy way, it's really one of my favorite committees. And because it touches so many different areas of the fiscal impacts here in our state. And when this bill came to committee, it was Thursday of last week. I asked several questions, my members asked several questions, and I will give the chair credit for allowing us to have as good a discussion as time allowed because it was a busy day. But when we brought to the chair's attention that there was not a fiscal note, and how we had grave concerns over that. And there are many costs that are loaded into the bill, namely a either heavily customized or completely bespoke piece of software, which causes us concern here in the state of Minnesota. We don't have the best track record when we go to create software. There are a great many costs that roll up under our committee, and really our committee has a huge area of jurisdiction over many of the things that are in this bill. And we offered amendments, and none of them were taken. We were told, well, we can talk about that, but we would like to know when we might be able to talk about that. And all we really want to be able to do is to have an informed conversation around the bill. Now, the funny thing is, many of you in this chamber had helped me support something I did over the weekend. I did a polar plunge, and I was at the polar plunge, and a member of my community who is a DFLer had gotten my weekly update. And before we jumped in, because I wasn't sticking around to talk while I was wet coming out of the freezing water, but they said, Jim, I have a question for you about your weekly update. You said that the bill that came through committee had no fiscal note. What does that mean? And I thought, wow, that's a great question. And I said, well, a fiscal note is, and I have this one from last year, and Madam Speaker, this is not a prop, this is just a fiscal note from last year. This is the last time we had it, and it's a 10-figure impact to the state of Minnesota. There's a lot of money that's loaded into this, and I told this person that stopped me as we were preparing to jump, I said, well, a fiscal note helps legislators and the public see what the potential fiscal impact of something will be when a bill goes into law. And it helps us as legislators make informed decisions as to whether or not we are going to pass that into law or vote against it so it does not pass into law. And what this does is, as the representative of the people of 48A, it gives me the insight as to what's going to be the impact on the voter and the taxpayer. And I said, we don't have that. Now, mind you, this is a Carver County DFLer, and I won't say the words that they said, but suffice to say that they thought it was a little nuts. They may have had words that started with other letters of the language, or the alphabet, but they thought this is not responsible government. And that's just the question. It is not responsible government. So I will ask if the chair would yield, Madam Speaker.
Representative Cleavorn will yield. Representative Nash.
Thank you, Speaker Hortman. Chair Cleavorn, you and I have a good working relationship. We meet as often as the week offers us, and we text back and forth in committee. But would you commit to, once we have the fiscal note, to call this back into committee, which is largely a huge area of the fiscal impact of this bill. Would you commit to call this back into committee so that our committee members may have an informed conversation about the cost to our committee, which is the Committee of Jurisdiction for a lot of this? Would you commit to that?
Representative Claiborne.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. What I would say to you, Madam Speaker, is that without reading the fiscal note, I have no idea as to what the impact on our jurisdiction would be. While this bill does reach many places in state government, Madam Speaker, it is not coming out of the state government budget. It is dealing with costs that in the usual course of business, one agency may bill to another agency. So at this moment, without reading the fiscal note, I'm not jumping into what I would or would not do. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Representative Nash.
Well, Madam Speaker, I guess I had asked the question. I don't think the Speaker had asked the question. I would really hope to have the answer addressed to me.
Representative Nash, there's the custom and usage of the House as you address the presiding officer. But
Well,
Representative Nash.
Madam Speaker, well, I think Representative Claiborne made the point exactly. We don't know. But what we do know is that there will be software that gets created. That's Minute. That's in our purview. There will be things for Deed and Dolly, and those come in our committee. There are many instances in this bill that if you were to pull a commissioner or a chair aside and said, hey, does this committee roll up under your, does this area roll up under your committee? The answer would be, well, yes, it does. And I don't feel like I quite have everyone's attention, Madam Speaker, if we could quiet down the chamber.
Members, please take your conversations off of the House floor. Representative Nash.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. That's the point. That's the point that we're trying to make here, that this is a bill that touches a lot of committees. And as it relates to the committee that I serve as the ranking member on, there's a lot of area. The previous fiscal note, you go in and you say, well, this goes into State Gov Fi, and this goes into State Gov Fi. And I will, before I close, I will share with you a conversation that I had with a number of our new members. And I said, this place is all about process. And I am an institutionalist, and I know a lot of you are as well. We should embrace process. We should say that we will not do something that outkicks our coverage on a bill like this. We should say to the public in the state of Minnesota that while we understand that this may be a priority bill for you, we are going to wait until we have an informed vote before us. We don't know. All of the chairs that have yielded just now have said the same thing. I don't know. I don't know what the fiscal note will say. Well, I think it's reasonably easy to ascertain what the fiscal note will say because the last one is pretty close. My guess is it will be more due to inflation and more because the scope has possibly expanded. But folks, this is the last one. It's available online. It's really interesting. It's a great read as to what happens when you write a bill that spends a lot of money. I guess my question that I will put to all of you before I sit down is, are you willing to tell Minnesota that you don't really feel encumbered by the fiscal implications of a bill, that you're just willing to pass it out? This is a great piece of information. We're waiting for it. What I will also tell you is that when I came in as a freshman, we waited on fiscal notes, and the times that we didn't, many of the members that are here in the chamber now were in the minority. One in particular, Representative Nelson, my friend over there, would bring up, well, where's the fiscal note? We don't have a fiscal note. And our chairs would say, well, we'll hold the bill until we have the fiscal note. So custom and usage would tell us that we should wait for the fiscal note. Members, this is an easy thing. Minnesotans are watching, and they're disappointed by the fact that you are in such a rush that you don't want to do something as simple as make an informed vote. Because when we vote on things, when I vote on something, since I can't question other people's voting motives, when I vote on something, I'm saying I'm voting for this because I feel like it's a good bill, or I'm voting against this thing because I feel that I don't have either enough information or I'm opposed to the content of the bill. I couldn't make either of those informed decisions because I don't know what the fiscal impact is. That's an important conversation that we should be having in committee. And I will tell you, Madam Chair, my members on the committee, and I'm committing this to them and I'm not going to look at them because they're going to hate what I'm about to say, we'll come back at night. We'll go until midnight if we have to, just to talk about the implications of this bill for state government finance. This is important. Please don't trivialize this. Please don't look down at the floor and think, well, Nash will shut up eventually. But this is important. So important that a person that lives in my district who is on your side of the aisle agreed with my assessment, and they were fairly disappointed that this is moving forward the way it is. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The member from Hennepin, the Majority Leader, Representative Long.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. There seems to be a tendency to want to discuss the merits of particular bills when we're talking about re-referrals, so I just want to remind folks that we are only talking about moving a bill from one committee to the other to continue the committee process, and to reassure everyone that when the bill comes back to the floor, there will be lots and lots of time on third reading to have debates on the merits of the bill. We have in front of us a bill that's been around for a long time. I understand a lot of you mentioned that you've read the fiscal notes from previous sessions, and so you have a pretty good understanding for the overall framework of the bill. It has additional committee stops. Human Services is where it's going next. Commerce Committee will be the stop after that, and Ways and Means will follow that. The bill will not move out of Ways and Means without a fiscal note. And so when the bill comes to the floor, there will be a fiscal note. You all will have plenty of time to debate the merits of the bill with a full fiscal note in front of you, and so I would urge members to vote no. Thank you.
The member from Stearns, the maker of the motion, Representative Demuth.
Thank you, Speaker Hortman. Well, I appreciate what the Majority Leader said, that we would have plenty of time to debate this bill in the future stops and on the floor. What we have seen so far in this session is that when we get to the floor, or even in committee, our amendments are rarely, if never, taken. We have got to do our work in the committee, as has been the past practice in this body for decades. You've heard from our leads. You have heard from workforce development, judiciary finance, children and families, labor and industry, state government finance, asking if the chairs would just consider taking it back and referring it back to the committee. We were looking for maybe one assurance that we did not get in this place this afternoon. In fact, it actually supported what we heard from the chairs. It supported our reason for wanting a fiscal note, because what we heard from many of the chairs was we had no idea what the fiscal note is going to say. That is exactly why we need to refer this bill back to the committees, wait on the fiscal note, see what it says, determine if it is even going to be affordable for Minnesotans, employers and employees, and make the best decision before this actually would go into law. So, Madam Speaker, members, I would ask that you would vote no on adopting this committee report and send it back to where it needs to go. Thank you.
Members, a yes or a green vote is a vote to adopt the committee report of House File 2. A no or a red vote is a vote to not adopt the committee report on House File 2. The clerk will take the roll. Will the clerk please call the name of the member who's participating remotely?
Agbaje.
Okay, go ahead.
Agbaje votes yes.
Agbaje votes aye.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 70 ayes and 60 nays, the report is adopted. Second reading of House Files.
Second reading House File 62.
Second reading.
Second reading House File number 1104.
Second reading. Introduction of House Files. The following House Files have been offered for introduction today. The Chief Clerk will report the House Files and give them their first reading.
Introduction and first reading of House Files 1583 through 1728.
First reading House Files 1583 through 1728. Calendar for the day. The first bill on the calendar for the day is House File 150. The clerk will report the bill.
House File number 150. Number 2 on the calendar for the day, an act relating to child care, the second engrossment.
The member from Ramsey, Representative Pinto, to explain the bill.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, it is a great day to get young kids off to a great start here in Minnesota. We have 2 bills on the calendar today. The first is HF 150, the second HF 13, and both of them are aimed at making sure that our kids can get off to a great start in Minnesota and we can address the needs in child care and early learning in our state. Members, HF 150 is a bill that has a fiscal impact before July 1. We just talked a lot about fiscal impacts. This is a bill that is designed to make sure that families can get child care and early learning right away. It invests $40 million in early learning scholarships for low-income families, again, to kick in right away to help approximately 4,000 families. It also will reverse a cut that is going to be coming in just a month in monthly payments that are going to providers. They've been receiving stabilization payments since July 1 of 21, and in March, those payments are scheduled to drop in half and to destabilize a sector that, again, is in a really precarious shape to begin with. So the bill will reverse those cuts, invest about $12.5 million to do that. Members, the bill as a whole is designed as a bit of a tourniquet on a gaping wound, one that's been present for a while, to make sure that we can allow parents to work, employers to expand, and communities to thrive now and long into the future for kids getting care and learning now, and again, for the development that they get later on. So I'm looking forward to discussion about the bill. That explains it, and thank you so much, Madam Speaker.
There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Daniels moves to amend House File number 150, the second engrossment. The amendment is coded A6.
The member from Rice, Representative Daniels.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I guess we didn't get the updated version. Representative Hudson will be presenting that amendment.
I'm sorry, could you repeat what you just said?
I'm sorry, Madam Speaker, but we changed the authors on the amendments, so Representative Hudson will be doing A6. Thank you.
The member from Wright, Representative Hudson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The A6 amendment will delete the $12.5 million for stabilization-based grants and apply that funding to early learning scholarships. This would make the whole bill a scholarship funding bill totaling $52.25 million. And the rationale for this really has to do with quality assurance and the best known mechanism for ensuring that families and students provide or are provided the best care possible as judged, as determined by them. And the Early Learning Scholarship Program provides that opportunity by empowering parents to take these scholarships and deploy them as they see fit to providers who are providing them with a service that they value. This is the direction that we should be going as we look to advance further into the sphere of the family and early childhood. We should make sure that we're taking every opportunity to put parents in the driver's seat of their child care options. Reforms are needed in how scholarship rates are set and the parent-aware rating system, but empowering parents now is in the best interest of children, and this would be a good start. The stabilization-based grants, by their very nature, as evident by their name, were meant to be a temporary stabilizing policy. The pandemic has largely settled down. The need for stabilization has abated, and we should be looking at permanent solutions going forward, not Band-Aids to get us through until we can double down on a system that disempowers parents and rewards, in some cases, as I'm sure we'll cover later tonight, providers who have not always been entirely faithful in their operation. Thank you.
Discussion to the A6 amendment. Representative Pinto.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Representative Hudson, thank you for bringing this forward. I've appreciated having you on our committee to discuss these issues. And I especially appreciate the amendment because it does allow me the chance to highlight really the two aspects of the bill that the amendment would take out. So one is the stabilization grants. These grants, you may not have realized this, members, but every provider in your district has been receiving these funds on a monthly basis, really in recognition of the fact that this is a public good that needs public support. I've got a report on how the grants have worked. 96% of providers have said that the grants were helpful in keeping their program open and operating, just having them be available so that families, you want to have parents in your districts be working, be contributing to the economy, be working for their employers. These grants have been absolutely essential in doing that work. 3/4 of the funds have gone to family child care providers, or 3/4 of the participants, family child care providers, 1/4 centers. So these have made a huge difference. And I would disagree with Representative Hudson. This is not just linked to the pandemic. This sector was in crisis well before the pandemic, and it continues to be that way. So those stabilization grants are critical. They've got to keep going. And so I would really urge members to vote against that part of the amendment. The other part of the amendment relates to the expansion of the eligibility for scholarships from birth up. Representative Hudson talks about empowering parents now. I don't know how it empowers parents to have them wait until their child is 3 years old and then they get one of these scholarships. If they're that good, why are we not, it's parents with young kids, the littlest kids absolutely need support. And so members, I would urge you to vote against the amendment. It would gut the purpose of the bill. We want to make sure that we're having families of young kids of whatever age receive the support that they need, and that their providers actually able to provide that care and learning by being open, and that's what the stabilization grants are needed for. Thank you.
Further discussion to the A6 amendment. Representative Hudson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So part of the reason why we need to take a serious look at the child care stabilization grants is because of how they have been misused and misappropriated. So when we did indeed hear this bill in committee, in the Children and Families Committee, there was a testifier from South Metro Child Care. And as it turns out, this testifier was operating under a license revocation order pending approval for failing to maintain proper staff ratios and other violations. So this raises a question on whether this provider was paid grants based on the number of employees they actually employed or paid based on the number they were supposed to have in order to meet their staffing ratios. And that's just one of the factors, one of the questions that looms over the effectiveness of these stabilization grants, which again, were conceived as a temporary measure that's evident in what we call them, stabilization, and likely, I imagine, were not vetted with the intention of ongoing into the future. This same provider, South Metro Child Care, received $419,182 in CCAP reimbursements for fiscal year 2022, and over $160,000 from stabilization grants for fiscal years 22 and 23. Their revocation order was for failure to maintain those child-to-staff ratios and also failure to maintain adequate staff distribution requirements. And again, you know, this is one of those things that if you're a parent, you're going to notice this. When you go to the child care center and you see that it's understaffed, you see that people are running around flustered and overwhelmed, that's going to be an indication of poor quality. And if you have the ability to choose to take your money somewhere else, that provides an inherent quality assurance mechanism. And so I would ask that we take this money from the child care stabilization grants and we reallocate it to the early learning scholarships in order to put parents in the steering seat when it comes to their child care. And I ask that you vote green, and I ask for a roll call vote.
Representative Hudson requests a roll call. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. The member from Chisago, Representative New Brindley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I was looking through this. Just this morning, I received a letter, snail mail actually, from a child care provider in my district. She has run into a situation where she was clearly dealing with a regulation issue that was onerous and really problematic for our child care providers. And in that letter, she noted that in Chisago County, in the last 3 years, we have gone from 110 in-home child care providers down to 60. That's just in the last 3 years. And since July 1st of 2021, so less than 3 years ago, across the state, we have lost 700 family child care providers. 700. And we are told constantly about the crisis, and we're told how important these stabilization grants are, but I'm not really sure what we're stabilizing. These have been around. The Democrats did these, quote, stabilization grants, I don't know, was it last year? But prior to that, the federal government during COVID was providing direct payments to child care providers. Those child care providers had to be willing to take children of frontline workers, something that was clearly critical during the pandemic. These child care providers were asked to keep their doors open during that time, and they did. And in fact, Minnesota was a unique state in that we did not lose the child care providers during that time that the rest of the country lost. And yet here we are, after having passed these, quote, stabilization grants, down 700 providers. 700 family in-home daycare providers across the state of Minnesota. This is no small thing. And so again, I would ask, we're talking about, perhaps it's just a misnomer. Perhaps this is misnamed as these stabilization grants, because they are certainly not stabilizing the child care situation in Minnesota. But instead of digging in and figuring out what the problem actually is, although frankly, if the majority was willing to hear some thoughts, we've got them, because we are talking to our child care providers all the time. And we are hearing about the regulations that are in place that are preventing them from doing the good work they want to do. Like I said, I had a snail mail letter from a provider in my district just this morning when I arrived. People are not leaving because they don't have a stabilization grant. We've been doing this. We've been doing stabilization grants. And we are losing child care providers hand over fist. Your solution is not working. It does not have a good track record. In fact, we have a track record of loss. We have a track record of losing, destabilizing child care while providing stabilization grants. It makes no sense. It makes absolutely no sense what we are doing today. And so I thank you, Representative Hudson, for offering an amendment that would make much better use of these funds, that would put this money where it can help individual children to ensure that they have success. But right now, I don't even know why. Like I said, perhaps it's just misnamed as stabilization. because it's not doing that. It is not stabilizing the child care crisis that we have in Minnesota. And thank you, Representative Hudson, for offering a better solution to deal with these funds. I would encourage a yes vote on the amendment.
Seeing no further, there's further discussion. Who was first? The member from Ramsey, Representative.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'll just say briefly that I understand the anecdotal, the conversations Representative New Brindley is referring to, but I got the tapes. I mean, I've got a survey that was done of the thousands of providers, which I should note included 5,400, maybe more than that, family child care providers, 81% of which said that these are very helpful to stay open. So it's true, all the states around us, all the states around the country are losing in-home providers. We would have lost many more. This is a sector that is broken, but my goodness, these have been extremely helpful in keeping folks open, and take that from the providers themselves and what they have to say. Vote no. Thanks, Madam Speaker.
The member from Anoka, Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And what Representative Pinto just said is really a crystallization of what of the decision that we're making here. Are we going to just listen to providers? Not all providers are created equal. Or are we going to listen to parents and kids? If we're really concerned about helping kids and making sure kids have child care, the best way we can spend our money is to make sure that parents are empowered to help us know what the providers are that are doing a good job and should be supported. Not all providers are equal. Not all providers are fungible. Some child care providers do a great job. Most of them do a great job. Some of them do less than a great job. And our state money should not just be sprayed equally across the field based on head count at some past point in time. The most effective way that we can use our money, the best way that we can help kids, is to empower kids and parents to have the money follow them where they're going, empower parents, listen to parents, let them help us figure out where the most effective child care providers are, and that's exactly what Representative Hudson's amendment does. It provides the same amount of financial support from us to kids to help them get good child care, but it actually makes sure that we're making sure that that money is going to the places where parents are helping us to determine the best places to spend that money. So Representative Hudson, thank you for this amendment. This is a very, very common sense way for us to make sure that the state money that we are spending is going to the best place possible, and that's by listening to the parents rather than just spraying it indiscriminately across the child care sector. So I encourage all members to please vote yes. This is a good amendment. Thank you.
Any further discussion to the A6 amendment? Seeing none, the clerk will take the roll on the amendment. Will the chief clerk please call the name of the member who is voting remotely?
Egbadje.
Egbadje votes no.
Egbadje votes no.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 60 ayes and 70 nays, the motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Zelensnikar moves to amend House File Number 150, the second engrossment. The amendment is coded A7.
The member from St. Louis, Representative Zelensnikar.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I stand today with the A7 amendment to ask members of the body to consider adjusting this. Right now, the stabilization grants are based on a method by the number of children, are actually the number of FTEs. This amendment adjusts it based on the number of children that were receiving child care services for the prior month. So for the stabilization grants, it would mirror more of the method that we do in education, which is per pupil funding. It would follow the child, and so the methodology is based on that principle. And so I ask that members would consider looking at the stabilization grant formula to be based on the number of children served in the prior month. So we'd be looking at the base grants for April, May, and June, just to be distributed by the average number of children cared for versus looking at FTEs, similar to how we do education. Thank you, and I ask you to consider the amendment. Madam Speaker, I'd like to ask a roll call.
Representative Zelensnikar requests a roll call. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Representative Pinto.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Zelensnikar, thanks for the suggestion for the proposal. These grants have been going out for the last year and 3/4 in a certain way, in a really simple way. It's probably worth highlighting right now, if I hadn't previously, and I guess your amendment makes it clear, we're just talking about a couple months, just through the end of June of 2023. And so given that we have a system that's been working, it's based on human beings doing the work. If you're a human being doing the work, then you get a certain payment, and then that's how that's calculated. Representative, I'd be concerned in bringing this in that we are making a simple system far more complicated for a couple months. And to my mind, if somebody is doing the work, we want to make sure they get paid, get compensated to do that. A reminder, this is the lowest paid occupation you can get with a high school diploma. The educating our next generation is that lowest paid possibly that you can get. 1/4 of the people who do this work experience food insecurity. 1/3 of them are on public assistance themselves, getting funded through other programs because the pay is so low. So we want to do for stabilizing is have these monthly payments continue to go 70% to compensate those workers, but keep it that simple. And so I would urge members to vote against this amendment. Thank you.
Discussion to the A7 amendment. Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the A7 amendment. Will the clerk please call the name of the member who is voting remotely?
Egbadje.
Egbadje votes no.
Egbadje votes no.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 60 ayes and 70 nays, the motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. There are no further amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File Number 150.
Third reading. Discussion to the bill. The member from Wright, Representative Hudson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, or Madam Speaker. Again, just to reiterate, and I didn't stand up for the last amendment, so I'll make the point now. We administer these child stabilization grants based upon the number of FTEs as opposed to the number of students that are actually receiving care. And it's really a bizarre way of compensating an organization for providing a service. I work in the private sector. I'm an operations manager for a small business, a contractor to a larger business. And we employ people to do a specific job that is objective, and you can determine pretty clearly whether or not the job is being accomplished or not. And when our volume goes down, in other words, when there is less to do, less job to get done, out of necessity, we have to cut the number of employees on the roll or cut the amount of work that each given employee does. This is natural, this is rational, this is the way it should work. If we were required to pay people regardless of whether or not they had anything to do, the business would go under in very short order. It is only when you involve outside money taken through taxation and granted by the state to a business that they are unable to keep the doors open in spite of the fact that the actual work that they're doing has diminished in volume. And that's what we're talking about here. When you're paying people, you're providing funding, compensation to people based upon the number of people they employ rather than the work they do, you're going to get a lot of people standing around not doing a whole lot, which is not an effective use of taxpayer dollars. That's one of the reasons why my amendment should have been taken to funnel this into early childhood scholarships, and it's also the reason why the other amendment should have been taken to compensate these providers based upon the number of children who they're serving rather than the number of people they have hanging around. And I also raised during discussion of the amendment that I offered the issue of fraud, which is a word that's going to come up more than once tonight. I got a couple more stories to tell you, a couple more examples. One comes from a center called Future Scholars Childcare. This was owned by a Mr. Hussein, who was under federal indictment related to feeding our future, and yet his child care center received $1.3 million in subsidies since 2018. He received child care stabilization grants, which this bill extends for fiscal years 2022 and 2023. Another example, a organization called Liban Child Care Center, owned by a CEO by the name of Ms. Noor. Was under federal indictment related to feeding our future, so similar story. Center closed voluntarily in March 2022 after the FBI raided the home of the CEO. Prior to closing, the center was cited by DHS for overbilling, in other words, fraud. And prior to closing, this center received more than $1.5 million in CCAP payments in fiscal years 2021 and 2022. And they received child care stabilization grants in fiscal year 2022. And these are only a couple of examples. We'll have ample opportunity to talk more about the full scope, breadth, and depth of fraud and abuse, misappropriation of public dollars later this evening. But for the moment, suffice it to say, this is not a wise use of our money. This is a provision that demonstrably does not work. 700 child care centers closed, as Representative New Brinley pointed out. 700 home providers. That is not a functioning stabilization process. Millions of dollars potentially in fraudulent activity is not an effective public policy. So we had the opportunity to amend this tonight, to make it effective, to empower parents, to ensure quality, ensure value for the taxpayer by basing it off of children served rather than employees hanging around. Those offers were rejected, which makes the bill something I cannot vote for and that I encourage other members to vote red on. Thank you.
I recognize the member from Ramsey, Representative Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If folks take away anything from tonight, I hope it's that Minnesota's children are worth investing in. Let me repeat, Minnesota's children are absolutely worth investing in. We shouldn't talk about children in financial terms. I don't believe that. But in case folks are not convinced that giving children quality care is a good thing, rest assured, the very, very smart people at the University of Chicago tell us that when we invest in our youngest constituents, we can see returns as high as 13% per child per year. But right now, the U.S. only contributes an average of $500 for each toddler compared to our very wealthy counterparts around the world who contribute to their children about $14,000 per toddler per year. We should be embarrassed that in one of the richest countries in the world, we spend nearly 30 times less on our children. So I will be voting yes on House File 150 tonight as a first step to righting this inequality. And finally, in one of the richest countries in the world, we know that many women have exited the workforce because the household economics simply do not make sense for them to work outside the home. Our childcare industry is the backbone of our entire economy. But we have never compensated those in our care economy, like childcare providers and teachers, at a rate reflecting what their work is worth. This is likely why nearly 100% of the providers, Mr. Speaker, I don't think the House is in order.
Members, please take your conversations off of the House floor. Representative Lee.
Our childcare industry is the backbone of our entire economy, but we have never compensated those in our care economy at a rate reflecting the value of their work. This is likely why nearly 100% of the providers who have received these stabilization grants said it helped them stay afloat. If we want to address our worker shortage and keep parents in their jobs, we must first support our childcare workers. This is why I will vote green tonight to ensure all of our smallest constituents get a great start in Minnesota. Thank you.
I recognize the member from Douglas, Representative Franzen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. As you know, many moons ago, before this place, I too was a licensed child care provider. Boy, that was a different life, different time. Started when my boys, let's see, Carl was 1.5 years, and Colin, he was in my womb when I started. Speaking of working hard during childcare, let me tell you about doing childcare when you're pregnant. Not an easy task, especially when you're just starting out in that business. So I remember vividly telling my parents, I am going to be off because I'm going to have the baby soon. How long are you going to take off, Mary? Well, in the business of childcare, you can't really take off too much time when it's your own business. So, well, I took off a whopping week. 1 week. 1 week, and I was back to work, and it was wonderful, truly wonderful. The blessing of that job at that time is 2 weeks later, I took another infant, which was 2 weeks difference. Well, I shouldn't say 2 weeks because he was legal age, 6 weeks when I could take him. But anyway, they were 2 weeks apart. So it was like having twins. So I had my little Colin, who was 2 weeks older, then little Jacob, who was 2 weeks younger. And I'm not saying this to complain. I'm just reliving my glory days as a child care provider and just absolutely loved being at home with my 2 boys. And it was just the best time for me and my boys at that time. But back to the bill which we are discussing here. Of course, I could talk about my days as a child care provider for a very long time because it really was a wonderful job, a career for 4 or 5 years there. But I do want to talk about a little bit of something about this word stabilization. We make it sound that if we pass this bill, House File 150, the child care crisis is going to end. In fact, I recall voting off this floor a child care bill last year, which I, of course, spoke against. But I also said this bill was not going to do anything to solve the child care crisis. But I was reassured, yes, this bill is going to help. But here we are, passing House File 150 for the child care stabilization grants, which is not going to stabilize the child care industry at all. May make you feel good, May give you something to write about in your email updates. Look how much money we spent to stabilize a business that we are purposely destroying. Yes, this body is purposely destroying the private market so that they can usher in their government-controlled school-based programs. So I want you to remember that. On one hand, you're destroying the private market because you're empowering or want to empower the government to run the businesses. 699 licensed childcare providers disappeared from the time period of July 1st, 2021 to January 1st, 2023. 699 home licensed childcare providers. 699. That is a lot of childcare providers in the time of a year and a half. Do you know how many centers closed their doors during that time? One. Uno. One. One provider, one center-based licensed childcare. One. But meanwhile, the home-based providers, which is what I was, 699 dropped out. So I would be asking you to find out why that is. Why are the licensed childcare providers that work primarily out of their home dropping out? Because House File 150 is not going to address that issue. Members, vote no.
I recognize the member from Chisago, Representative New Brindley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'm wondering if Representative Pinto would yield for a question.
Representative Pinto will yield for a question. Representative New Brindley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'm wondering, Representative Pinto, if you can tell us, if you know, I don't even know if it's knowable, what percentage of providers returned the satisfaction survey that we keep hearing about?
I recognize the member from Ramsey, Representative Pinto.
Mr. Speaker, Representative New Brindley, good question. I'm looking through it to see if I can figure that out. I got a little bit thrown when you said the satisfaction survey, but I assume you're talking about the one I was quoting from in terms of the 80-some% saying it was very helpful. I'm going to be looking I'm going to say that I don't know at the moment, but as I sit back down, I'm going to be looking at this document, see if I can figure it out, Mr. Speaker.
Representative New Brindley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As with any self-reporting, I am quite confident that's not 100%. And in fact, usually the return rate on these kinds of things is relatively low. So that 81% number is a portion of providers. And really what I would say is it most certainly does not include the 700 family childcare providers that we lost. Those folks certainly were not included in that number. You know, again, I would just say that calling these stabilization grants is a misnomer. It's just not accurate. These grants have not stabilized the child care situation in the state of Minnesota. But as is our habit here, we don't bother to require that programs are effective, that programs are doing what we intended them to do before we give them more money. It's a really bad habit that we have here in the legislature. For whatever reason, we don't require accountability when we provide money for programs, and we should. But the fact that we have lost, and in fact, there's been a net loss across the board. There's been a net loss across the board with child care centers, certified child care centers, and family child care. All three, net loss across the board. But as Representative Franson pointed out, those family child care providers have certainly taken the biggest hit. 700 providers that we have lost. And when the stated purpose of a program is to stabilize the child care crisis, this program has clearly failed. This program has failed, yet here we are dumping more money into a program that does not work. Forget fraud, forget all the fraud we talk about. We don't even have to commit fraud. We'll just give you money. We'll just give it away with no accountability. It does not matter if it is effective. And members, it is clearly not. It is clearly not an effective program when we have lost 700 in-home child care providers since 2021. And again, in my own county, in Chisago County, the numbers are alarming. We have gone from 110 providers down to 60 in 3 years. These stabilization grants are not working. And as members of this legislature, we should demand accountability when we are providing public funds. These are taxpayer dollars. And frankly, they're taxpayer dollars being spent with a good purpose. Our goal, our purpose, is to make sure that the children of this state have access to good quality child care. That is a noble goal. That is a goal that every member of this body should share. But this program doesn't do it. And instead, we are throwing good money after bad. We are throwing good money after bad as we watch the destabilization of the child care crisis in the state of Minnesota. Members, vote no.
I recognize the member from Ramsey, Representative Perez Vega.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm proud of HF 150. I think about the family that I came from that were child care providers. Speaking only one language of Spanish at the time, I think about the elders, these beautiful, amazing, strong, yet short women who became child care providers for families that spoke different languages. I'm talking about different languages of Southeast Asia, different dialects of Latin America. They provided a family and a village. They provided an avenue of hope at young age for not just the children, but for parents. For parents to know that their kids are safe, are being taken care of, because those child cares become home away from home while mom and dad are working. And those workers that are now into the third generation of childcare and family, they have been broken, but they're not lost. They're here with hope when I see HF 150. Stabilizing means hope. I don't see fraud in hope. I see survival and healing of years that no one knew was coming, that not only broke those child care workers and directors from having to go into their savings account to provide for those workers because they couldn't lose the extra help, and they believed that this is about village and seeing that kid excel and seeing maybe one day that they could leave that same expertise of 30 years plus of childcare to the next generation to continue beauty and hope with diversity of these children growing and learning languages together and eating together and the purest memories of innocence. That's what's provided when you send your kid to childcare. And the people that run those childcares or are hired by those childcares are the people who are our warriors when it comes to education. They're the first steps. Their comfort, their nutrition. They're not being valued if you don't vote yes. You're not doing your job if you devalue their work. If you're not fighting for those child care workers. If you're not fighting for those children and their families. I loved being in committee to hear about the families, especially in our children and families committee to see the reactions of what the children bring to the child care providers. And to see when you pick up your children and who's caring for them, they deserve merits of honor. I see HF 150 being that merit of honor from the state of Minnesota. That through pandemics and challenges and hardships, we have their backs. So it is with great honor that I will be voting yes for HF 150. Thank you.
I recognize the member from Rice, Representative Daniels.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, members, for the good conversation. I won't be long. My members have made some very good points. And so I'll just kind of reiterate some of the things we talked about. If this bill was a scholarship bill, we could find some common ground with parents making decisions for their child care. I look forward to continued discussions on that line. This bill is not just about scholarships, but it's established a new way of funding child care programs that focuses on the employee rather than the children. When we stop focusing on the children, we are more likely to lose sight of the children and their best interests. This bill does not help our family child care providers that we've been overlooked far too long by the DFL majority. Since the beginning of these stabilization grants, we have seen a net loss of 1 center for child care, while losing 700 or close to 700 family child care providers. Losing these family child care providers is devastating for our communities. If your goal is to stabilize children's child care centers, perhaps you're succeeding. If your goal is to decimate family child care providers, unfortunately, you're succeeding also. I had a bunch of other notes, but it's been talked about by my colleagues. To try to summarize, these stabilization grants were only temporary from the federal government. Representative Franson, 2 years ago, asked to put an amendment on in committee, and all she wanted to do is notify the people that are getting the grants or this money that there's an end date. And that amendment was not accepted. Now we're trying to supplement stabilization grants with general fund dollars. It's not right. It doesn't fix the problem of expensive child care. So I really hope we can reconsider, and the conversations down the road will point us more towards the parents' ability to control where their child goes to daycare rather than the ones that are basically funded by and run by the government. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, members. Please vote no.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Nadeau.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thanks, members. You know, I work really hard to try to find ways to vote for these bills, and thank you, Representative Pinto, for bringing it forward. I dig and I look and I try to find what's the problem that we're trying to solve. And originally I looked at this and I said, you know, this is something maybe we can get behind. If we can, you know, we look at it, maybe we can find a way through. And I'm not sure, I never heard this bill in committee, so I don't know what kind of amendments were offered. But the one thing that I do know, and I've got a lot of child care providers in my district, and I hear from them a lot, you know, and like every other business, these businesses don't want to be subsidized. They don't want to be reliant on government support to ensure that they can deliver the service that they want to deliver. Now, I think it was vital for money to come into play when they were struggling, when families are struggling, when people weren't there. But we're moving away from that, and I think stepping down those subsidies, I think, are important. But at the same time, we have to look at what the significant challenges in daycare are. And it's wages, it's access, it's staffing issues, and we're seeing that across the board. It doesn't matter if it's nursing facilities or assisted living facilities. We're seeing these staffing issues across the board. And no matter how much we try to subsidize, no matter how much we try to stabilize these businesses that we rely on, it's not going to solve the real problem out there. And there's nothing in here that I can see, and I'm happy to have Representative Pinto respond if he'd like to. Where's the relief for families in this bill? And is there any? Because that's what I'm trying to figure out. Is there any relief? Is there any increase that we're going to increase staffing levels, increase access, be it Metro, Greater Minnesota, by voting green on this bill? If, Mr. Speaker, if Representative Pinto will yield.
He will yield. Representative Pinto.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Neto, thank you for asking the question. So providers right now are hanging on by their fingernails, right? So the economics of this sector do not work. Okay, they do not work. The cost of providing licensed early care and learning is less than families can afford to pay. The cost of providing high quality, which is of course what we want for our kids to get them off to a great start, the economics don't work. Just as, imagine that we had no dollars flowing into K-12, no public dollars at all. What would it be like, right? You'd have tons of kids in a class, 100 kids in a classroom, really low wages. So, and families paying a huge amount of money, right? And in early care and learning, the ratios have to be even smaller, right? 4 infants per provider. You couldn't have 100 infants with one provider. That wouldn't work, right? So just that as context for your question. So absolutely there's relief for families in the $40 million going to scholarships, right? To make sure that families can be getting additional early learning and care. The bill that we're going to hear, HF 13, making sure that there is more opportunity for families to find a provider, low-income families that can take care of them. Fundamentally, though, there has to be a provider there. And we know from listening to providers that these payments are critical to keep them in business as best they can. We have lost some along the way, but my goodness, we would have lost a heck of a lot more, and I can guarantee you we will lose many, many more. We need to listen to providers. So it's a combination of a package here that certainly does include relief for families, partly by making sure there's providers in place for them to be able to get services from. Thanks.
Representative Nadeau.
Thank you, Representative Pinto. Yeah, and I recognize that. I mean, in 2020, in 2002, I think we had around 14,000 daycare providers in Minnesota, and now we're down around 6,000. And I think we're increasing a little bit. We lost a lot of providers in these years, and I think it has more to do with the environment that they're trying to function in. And I like what you said when you're talking about the money going to these providers based on the FTEs. When you look at the capacity, the licensed capacity for these facilities, maybe they've got a capacity for 170 or 200, but they don't have the staff in order to provide that access. So they can only get the additional money, these stabilization dollars, based on the existing FTEs. If the FTEs continue to go down, the stabilization dollars really aren't helping. I mean, they're helping them stay afloat, but it still doesn't create the, any additional capacity that they're already licensed for. So I think it's a little backwards. I don't mean that disrespectfully, sir. I wish we would have, actually taken the money and put it into, into the Parent Aware program, into the amendment that Representative Hudson had, only because I think that is a more incentive dollar that would have promoted more access, more staff, more teachers, providing more access for parents and their kids. Again, thank you for bringing it forward. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Katiza Watoon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have had the privilege of serving for the past 3 terms on the Early Childhood Finance and Policy and now the Children and Families Finance and Policy Committee. This period of time has coincided with my family paying twice our mortgage payment and childcare costs, as well as a global pandemic, which further upended our broken system of early care and learning. During our remote and hybrid legislative session of the 2021-2022 biennium, we held, under Chair Pinto's leadership, a number of joint hearings with a variety of other committees, and because of the remote nature of those hearings, we heard from an extraordinary number of childcare providers sharing the necessity of these emergency funds. It's not always easy for those taking care of our littlest learners to get away to testify during the workday, especially for those who live in greater Minnesota. Minnesota was the first state to move on supporting our child care providers in 2020, and then we acted urgently in 2021 with bipartisan support to utilize COVID relief funding to stabilize this industry in crisis and support families with young children. We know that these payments are still needed, and these child care providers and early childhood educators are relying on this funding to keep the doors open. Parents can't choose the best place to send their kids if there are no places to choose from. Parents can't work if they don't have a safe and affordable place to take their children. Businesses can't hire if parents can't work. The child care workforce is the backbone of our economy, and today we have the opportunity to support them as they have continually supported us. During one of those remote hearings, I spoke directly to these providers and I told them, we see you, we value you, and you are essential. That remains true today, and I know the child care providers in each and every one of our districts are watching us. Members, you can show your support for them with a green vote today. Thank you.
I recognize the member from Stearns, the Minority Leader, Representative Damath.
Thank you, Speaker. And Speaker and members, this bill includes funding for early learning scholarships. If this were just a bill to fund and increase the funding for early learning scholarships, and if you remember, we actually had an amendment to do that, but it was voted down, I would actually be urging my members to vote yes. We know that early learning scholarships are a preferable approach to helping address the need for childcare and early education. Early learning scholarships are parent empowering and parent directed. And as such, sometimes we actually hear them referred to as kiddie vouchers because they promote a culture of educational choice for preschool and early education. Scholarships also empower parents as consumers to drive the market decisions rather than bureaucrats. Thanks to a current law that is actually the legacy of one of our former members, former member Jennifer Loon, all new money that goes into scholarship program goes to parents through Pathway 1. In short, this part of the bill empowers parents to choose providers rather than providers choosing families. Unfortunately, this bill is not just a scholarship bill. The child care stabilization grants were approved in June of 2021 using one-time federal funds with the intention of providing a short-term stopgap relief to providers suffering during the economic shutdown. These grants will begin to be reduced as they fade out by June 30th of 2023, and that was the intention. This bill, however, will use state general funds to continue the grants at current funding levels through the end of the fiscal year. And I would presume there's an intention of the next biennial budget making these grants permanent beginning July 1st. But there are two problems with stabilization grants in the current form. First, the funding has its own fraud concerns. These child care centers, linked closely to those indicted by federal authorities, also receive stabilization funding. And centers facing license revocations are funded with these grants. These raise questions as to whether or not the Department of Human Services is validating whether certain centers are reporting the number of employees they actually have or the number of employees they should have to meet the staff-to-child ratio. Second, the funding per employee approach is a radical change to how we should fund our child care. CCAP, even with its cloud of fraud, relies on simple premise that we pay for the number of children served, not the number of people employed. We don't fund our schools on an average daily employee, but average daily attendance of the enrolled children. It's a child-centered, child-focused funding model. Whatever flaws exist in the oversight and accountability, the premise is simple. Provide care to our kids, and you would get paid for providing that care. So as we look at how we fund programs for children, whether those be in childcare, early education, our K-12 education, we need to keep the child as the focus of the funding. Money should always chase the child. Children should never have to chase the money. And I have to wonder, as we're talking about stabilization, members, when are we actually going to talk about stabilizing our assisted living and our nursing homes? But going back to this bill, the reasons that I have raised, I would urge you members to vote no.
I recognize the member from Ramsey, the author of the bill, Representative Pinto.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So members, I'm, on the one hand, I'm gratified and I guess I feel optimistic about the fact that there does seem to be a consensus around the need to provide early care and learning for low-income families. That's great, and let's follow through on that. Let's make sure this session that every single low-income family receives the high-quality early care and learning that they deserve, and I'll be eager to work with you all on that. That's a really important goal to accomplish. I am bewildered, however, though, that you would vote against that because of the desire to, or because of the inclusion of these 3 months of payments to providers. And I guess I'm a little bewildered by the arguments that I've heard. So you've said that the sector is really broken, that we are losing providers, and so therefore we shouldn't help it, I guess. That we don't need to stabilize the sector anymore because this was about the pandemic, and yet the sector is in free fall now as well, and in fact, we're not doing enough. Members, these payments were a compromise with the Republican Senate. They were...
Mr. Speaker, point of order.
Representative Damas, state your point of order.
Impugning the motives of members.
State
Mason's
your...
101. Mason's 101.
Members, I will ask that as we proceed with this debate that we confine our remarks to the question before the body. Representative Pinto.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And to lead Dameth members of the minority, I really was just intending to describe what I've heard, that you would vote for the portion of the bill relating to scholarships, but for the portion relating to stabilization payments. And what I heard is these arguments that, in fact, the sector is broken, but that we should not have these continued stabilization payments. Members, this is a solution that works. We've heard this from providers. It's a solution that works in concert with a whole lot of other things is the thing. This is a sector that, where the economics just do not work. And I heard a comment that this doesn't fix the problem of expensive child care, that there's concerns with wages and staffing. These payments go to wages. They go to staffing. We never said that this would cause the crisis to end. Of course not. It's multi-decades in the making, and this was the result of work that was simply intended to try to stabilize as best as we possibly could. And finally, members, thinking about the economics of this, there was a comment talking about people who do this work are maybe possibly sitting around. You know, we're sort of measuring based on the number of employees. Nobody in our state is working harder than people working with our young kids. Nobody at all. These folks are hustling on, as I say, the lowest wages that somebody can get with a high school diploma. So members, for a couple of months to get us to July 1, to listen to providers, to keep them in operation, members, I would urge you to take your support for the first part of the bill and recognize the need for the second part of the bill, and let's all vote green. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
There being no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the bill. Would the clerk please call the name of the member who is voting remotely?
Agbadje.
Agbadje votes yes.
Agbadje votes aye.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 70 ayes and 60 nays, the bill is passed and its title agreed to. The next bill on the calendar for the day is House File 13. The clerk will report the bill.
House File number 13, number 1 on the calendar for the day, an act relating to child care assistance, the second engrossment.
I recognize the author of the bill, the member from Ramsey, to explain the bill, Representative Pinto.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So this is the second half of our Great Start Day. I'm grateful to members for their support of the portion of our work that gets us to July 1. Members, House File 13 would meet really an implied promise that the state made a long time ago in participating in the federal program, the Child Care Development Fund. In our state, it's called the Child Care Assistance Program. To have the rates for that program be set at the 75th percentile of the market rate survey. This is a survey that's taken every 3 years. And what HF 13 would do would be to simply set our rates at the level that they've supposed to been to be for years. It would also reprioritize the waiting list that counties use to make that list more efficient and make sure that kids and families are getting the care that they need, and counties have the confidence for doing that. And there are some measures relating to integrity of programs at DHS. I suspect we'll have some conversations about that, so I may not get into a ton of detail, except for simply noting that it will provide DHS with additional authority that is needed to end payments to providers who've been found. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ending payments to providers who've been found has been excluded from other state programs under either state agencies or federal programs. So additional powers to the commissioner to do that. Members, HF 13, as I said, gets our rates up to where they're supposed to be in terms of payments. These are for low-income families getting child care and early learning, and we want to make sure that those rates are as they need to be to give families the maximum choice and opportunity. And this is so that parents can work and so that employers can expand. We can deal with the worker shortages we're seeing in all the sectors that we all care about, which really have child care at the base. The child care workforce is, in fact, the workforce behind the workforce. I look forward to a conversation, and thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Members, there is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Daniels moves to amend House File number 13, the second engrossment. The amendment is coded A12.
I recognize the author of the amendment, the member from Rice, Representative Daniels, to explain the A12 amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm hoping this will be a friendly amendment to the bill author. This amendment would require implementation of centralized provider registration system for child care assistance program, including electronic recorded system for CCAS reimbursements. The electric payment system would use non-biometric methods for identification and work with the commercial available systems to provide and providers might be already using. The cost of this developing the system would be covered by the appropriation in the bill and to require the new system to be placed prior to the CCAP rates. And I'm hoping that the bill, the author, Representative Pinto, would find this as a friendly amendment.
Any discussion to the amendment? I recognize the member from Ramsey, Representative Pinto.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Daniels, thanks for this, for bringing this forward. It's an intriguing idea, and I would love to work with it, work with you on exploring it. I might ask, will Representative Daniels yield to a question, Mr. Speaker?
He will yield to a question, Representative Pinto.
If I can ask Representative Daniels whether he has introduced this as a bill or whether he's aware of it being introduced. I don't believe that it has been in my time chairing the committees that oversee this area.
I recognize the member from Rice, Representative Daniels.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Chair Pinto. I don't believe there has been a bill on this, But then again, the rate that these bills are moving through committees and onto the House floor has been pretty rapid. Well, you and I came in the same year, so 9 years we've been serving. This is pretty fast-paced. But I would ask you for just consideration on accepting this amendment, even though there hasn't been a bill introduced previously. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Pinto.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Daniels, thank you. And I know, I suspect that Chair Pulowski would not disagree that we seem to not have any trouble in this chamber introducing bills this year at a quite rapid pace. I will commit to you, Representative Daniels, that you or any member who introduces this, I would be very happy to give it a hearing. I do think it's something to look at. I will note that as this has been explored, when I've heard about it through the years, there's been some concern for providers. And we've had a lot of talk about, burden of regulations for providers. There's been some mixed thoughts on that. I think about half of providers have electronic systems at this point, but the question is kind of how it interfaces. So in any case, not prepared to move forward with this at this time, but certainly happy to work with you, especially if you'd be interested in introducing as a bill or another member would. And so I would urge members respectfully to vote against this. Thank you.
Any further discussion to the amendment? All those in favor of the amendment, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, please say no. No. The motion does not prevail and the amendment is not adopted. There are no further amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File number 13.
Third reading. Discussion to the bill. I recognize the member from Douglas, Representative Franzen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Here I am again talking about childcare, something that I did once many, many moons ago. And, members, I'm actually very surprised we're in third reading already, so it's kind of exciting. A lot has been said about this industry over the last two bills now, and I know, I'm sure we've got lots of advocates wondering how we're going to vote on this bill. When I did childcare, as I stated, I started off with my son was 18 months, and then I had my newborn Colin, so I had Carl and Colin, in my own business. And did you know that when you do licensed childcare, those numbers count against you? So when I started off, I think my license, I could take a total of 8 kids, and then there was a breakdown, and that was for a year. I think it was a Class A. And 2 of those spots were taken up by my 2 boys. And this is for every licensed family childcare provider. Their spots go to their kids. Is it fair? I don't know. Is it not fair? One of the benefits that I saw personally doing the business was that I got to be home with my 2 boys and instill the values I wanted them to be instilled with, and had a wonderful experience doing that. However, centers are treated much differently. I have this list here of, I think it's 224 providers thus far that I pulled off, 224 centers that are authorized to receive CCAP for up to 25 children of their employees. So if I was an employee of a child care center and I wanted to bring my children to work with me, that was fine. So CCAP pays parents to take care of their own children. There's no subsidy for home child care providers. who take care of their own children, and those children also count against their own ratios. And so for funsies, I started going through the names on this list and looking up their license to see if they were stellar providers. By stellar providers, I mean like, you know, minor infractions like we hear from the home child care providers, like they left a bobby pin out and they got written up for that, or they left their toothbrush on the counter, they got written up for that. Minor infractions, right? Woofda, I'm telling you, off this list, I was pretty shocked at the long list of violations that these centers have. Where am I going with this? Members, there is an unfair advantage to centers when it comes to the ratios, something that this body needs to think of. Also, CCAP reimbursement rate increase. I think we can all say, you know what, those rates probably should be increased because of inflation. A lot of inflation, we're all seeing that. The Biden-Walz inflation has not been good to Minnesotans. It has not been good to Americans. However, when this body does not take the fraud seriously, when we continue to allow fraud walk out the door and say, oops, we did it again, guess we'll have to try something else. Taxpayers say to us, what are you doing down there? What are you doing down there? This bill, in my humble opinion, will continue to feed the fraud program that we have. Because we have not taken seriously the issues that have plagued this program for years. So members, today I will be voting no on House File 13.
I recognize the member from Rice, Representative Daniels.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I'm going to make a motion to re-refer this to the Children and Families Committees. When this bill was in Children and Families, Republican concerns regarding rampant CCAP fraud and the links to Feeding Our Future were dismissed. Our committee never received, reviewed, or discussed half-heartedly integrity measures added to this bill in Ways and Means. Before this bill passed by the House, the Children and Families Committee should review the new language in this bill and determine if there was meaningful measures included. So therefore, Mr. Speaker, I move to refer House File 13 to Children, Families, Policy, and Finance Committee, and I request a roll call.
Representative Daniels requests a roll call vote. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call vote on the motion to re-refer. Is there any discussion to the Daniels motion to re-refer House File 13? I recognize the member from Ramsey, Representative Pinto, to the motion.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Daniels, I'm assuming, I guess maybe I should just verify this if I can, if Representative Daniels will yield, Mr. Speaker. Will Representative Daniels yield to a question, Mr. Speaker?
Representative Daniels, will you yield for a question? He will yield for a question. Representative Pinto.
Representative Daniels, I just want to make sure I understand the basis for your motion. It has to do with the language starting on page 4 regarding limits on receiving public funds. I just want to make sure that I'm understanding kind of what the concerns are, or that's what you're talking about.
I recognize the member from Rice, Representative Daniels.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Chair Pinto. It's regarding the language that was changed in Ways and Means, and just concerning that the language changed after we heard it in Children and Families, and now we're going to pass the bill. So I'd really appreciate if we could re-refer it, hear the new language, talk about the issues that have happened. Everybody's got the data on how much expected fraud there's been over the years. There's still, by the Inspector General, there's still 40 plus investigations going on CCAP. When I asked in committee, and you were present, I believe, I asked them specifically, do you have, they said the $100 million was not possible in fraud. And so I asked the Inspector General, well, give me a number. Is it 10 million? Is it 30 million? Is it, what it is? And she could not give me an answer. And if you remember, at that time, I asked for how many ongoing investigations there were ongoing, and she couldn't answer that. But about 2 hours later, I got an email from her saying that there was 40 ongoing investigations. So with the new language, I'd really appreciate if we could bring it back to the committee and go over the language and kind of start this thing over again. Thank you.
Representative Pinto.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Daniels. So I guess this does give me a greater chance to highlight that language. I mean, I know I've heard from members on your side of the aisle and members in general concerns about making sure that the DHS commissioner has the authority to exclude from programs those individuals who may have been excluded in other programs. So that's what this language is about. I understand it's a little bit unusual to have added it later, but the concern is we want to make sure to move just as quickly as possible so that we make sure to cut off if somebody is doing wrong. We want to make sure to cut off as quickly as possible on what they're doing. So the language is pretty simple, Representative Daniels. I'd ask members to vote against the motion, and as you'll see in the language here, what it does is says that if somebody is prohibited in some other from participation in some other state or federal program, we want to make sure the commissioner has the power to cut them off in DHS as well. I feel like I hear a real sense of urgency from that among your members. I understand it. It's shared on this side of the aisle, and that's why I'm moving forward with it right now. I think we should pass this and get this language going as quickly as we can. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Is there any further discussion to the motion? Members, before I instruct the clerk to take the roll, I will remind us that we are voting on Representative Daniels' motion that House File 13 be re-referred to the Committee on Children and Families, Finance and Policy. Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll. Would the clerk please call the name of the member who is voting remotely?
Agbadje.
Agbadje votes no.
Agbadje votes no.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 59 ayes and 70 nays, the motion does not prevail. Members, we are back to discussion after third reading of House File number 13. I recognize the member from Chisago, Representative New Brindley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And members, as I was looking at this, this bill is based on this rate survey that's done every 3 years with child care providers. And we adjust the rates periodically. Last time they were adjusted, we bumped them up from 25%, or the 25th percentile, to the 30th and 40th percentile. And now, with this bill, we are increasing that to a whopping 75th percentile. This is a massive increase. And of course, the problem here is that after all these years, we still have not gotten answers and have had resolution to the issue of fraud in the system. And I know our Democrat friends like to tell us, no, it's fine, it's fine, it's fine. Well, there is literally nothing that tells us that it's fine. Nothing. And in fact, when the real bombshell of the CCAP fraud came out a few years ago, we were told that it was about $100 million in fraud. $100 million went out the door in fraudulent payments. Now, that number is alarming in and of itself, but you know, the total number that was appropriated for CCAP at the time was $240 million. That means 40% of what we appropriated as a legislature went out the door in fraud. 40%. And these issues have not been resolved since then. And now, rather than ensuring that the money we spend to take care of our kids is spent on taking care of our kids, it's just like the last bill. We're just going to throw some more money in it. We're just going to throw some more money. We're going to increase these rates. We're not going to bother to know that these dollars are being spent where they're supposed to be spent. We're not going to hold folks accountable to ensure that when we do find fraud, there is accountability, because you know what? $100 million, zero accountability. None. $100 million. 40%, 40% of the money intended to take care of our kids went out the door in fraud. And yet, instead of fixing the problems, again, as is our habit here in the legislature, instead of fixing the problems, we just put more money in. More money. That'll solve the problem for sure. If there's more money, certainly it won't go out in fraud anymore. But we never bother to make sure. We never bother to hold folks accountable. We never bother to ensure that there is accountability. And in fact, at the time, it was funny. DHS told us over and over and over again in these different programs that they had internal audits, because of course at the time we were saying we need to audit these programs. We need to audit these programs. But DHS assured us, no, don't worry, we do internal audits. Well, guess what? The DHS internal audits found nothing. They did not find one incident of fraud. So forgive me if we don't trust the internal audits from DHS. They don't do the job. They don't actually dig in and find the problems. They don't. And instead of demanding that of our state agencies, instead of demanding that there is accountability with taxpayer funding, we're just going to dump more in. We do this over and over and over, and it's just not right. It's just not right. We are up to, with this bill, we're going to be up to about $1.5 billion spent this session. This bill's going to take us over that. $1.5 billion. We don't even have budget targets yet. These bills are not even part of our overall comprehensive state budget, and we've already spent $1.5 billion. We have not put a single provision in place to ensure that money is being spent where it needs to be spent. We have not put a single provision in place to ensure that folks that have committed fraud in the past are done doing so. Although, just what, a couple of weeks ago, 2 more folks were indicted. Two more folks. Now, this was in relation to feeding our future, but they were running child care centers 2 weeks ago. But by all means, let's just put more money in and more money in and more money in with no accountability. At some point, the taxpayers are going to be onto you, and they're going to see what you're doing, and they're going to see how irresponsible it is when, frankly, you've spent $1.5 billion already, and it's going to open their eyes when you get to the point where, sorry, there's no funds left to take care of your Social Security taxes. There's no funds left to say, you know what, senior citizens, we should not be taxing you on your Social Security income. You know what? To our nursing home folks who really are in absolute crisis, in dire need, facilities are closing, I'm sorry, there's no money left. We've already spent it all. That's what we're doing. Instead of funding those programs that we track, we know need our help, we're dumping more and more money into programs that have proven fraudulent. They have proven documented fraud, and that's where we're going to dump our money instead. It's just wrong. It's just wrong. Fix your house before you keep dumping money into it. I implore members to vote no on this bill. As Representative Daniels suggested, at the very least, send it back to committee, fix it, put some measures in place to ensure that this money is not going to be spent in fraud.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Pryor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you. Got this in time. So I'm going to start because I'm just, Representative Franson has been taking us down memory lane, so I thought I would go there too at the beginning of my House speech right now. So even before she started her child care, I was taking my children to child care. And I was the only working person in our household. My husband was a student, and so I was the one income that was going to bring us forward. And so it's like, and so many mothers know what that's like when your family depends on you, and you gotta deliver that baby. And I have so much respect that you could continue to do childcare after just delivering. You are amazing for what you did, and I do have to acknowledge that. I don't think I could have done it. And so I had my 10 weeks, and then I had to have that, when we were in that period after birth and looking for a child care home, and we were choosing family child care. That was our preference. It just seemed to be right and closer to what I had grown up with in a two-parent home with a mother that stayed home with us. And it was so important to me who I was going to entrust my children to for the majority of their young lives. And then when we had the second one, and we're going through the same thing, and it's the family of four now and only one income. And it was that child care that we depended on. So one of the most important things that I will have ever done in my life is to be on the committee that talks about and tries to support our child care industry and be aware of these, support our children, our next generation of Minnesotans into their future lives. This will be the most important work that I have ever done and could ever imagine doing in my life. And when people said, what are your priorities? Top 3 priorities. One of them was always being able to fund child care assistance and early learning scholarships. I do group those together. So no matter, we've done great things, and we will continue to do great things, but for me, this has been and always will be the most important. And I have 90-year-old parents in assisted living, so I get there's other pressures on the budget, but this is, for me, what I will always care about, because we know child care is in a crisis, and was. I started this committee, when we started this committee, we were hearing about the crisis in child care. That was before the pandemic. And it's really simple to understand. Providers can't afford to do the job and charge any less than they are right now. Parents really can't afford it, especially parents that come from have low-wage jobs. And yet, there is no more important time in your life than those early years, when you're an infant and a toddler, those young kids. And I know that it's still important even when you're older than that. You need consistent quality care and learning. So the first bill we heard addresses that. This bill also addresses that. And let me get to the handout and just draw everybody's attention to this. The handout that you just got about what happened and what we found out about the fraud that was in our system. I was there when the OLA report came out. And fortunately, we had, I think, the right person at the right time to address the findings of that report. We had a prosecutor that said, how can we end this and make sure it doesn't happen again, that we catch it early and have a fix that works as a process, not as a statement on a TV show where you say, well, we fixed all this. No, but a process in place. And I remember when we heard the final bill that year, it was down in the basement of the state office building, which was not our regular meeting room or our regular time because it was at night. And I know that we accepted Republican amendments on that bill because the input from both the parties was so important to address what was happening and what had happened and to make sure it didn't happen again. So we came forward with a strong bill, which we'll see laid out as a reminder to folks that we did address it. We did it with working with our Republican colleagues at the time, and there was a bill that was put forward to address it. And I remember the amendment that Representative Franson put forward. We took half of the amendment because it was a good idea. Then the next session, when we came back together again, we said, DHS, how are you implementing this? And we had a hearing talking about the processes, and that's also on your sheet, the processes that DHS put into place, process improvement. Really, if you're in business, that is, the highest standards of always recognizing what your problem is and what you're trying to do, and always figuring out, is your process serving it? And all the checks and balances that were in place. So we had that hearing to make sure that we were addressing what had happened and to make sure that our taxpayer dollars are directed where we want them. Because money that goes to someone that's not serving our kids is money that should have been spent to serve our kids. So we have this discussion again. And you know what? We have our differences. But I know, and I will stand behind the work that our committee did. I will stand behind the work that GHS is doing to make sure that we have integrity in our system. All right, and now we get to the great work that we can do today. Again, look at your handouts. Kids can't wait. That's the one thing that we kept hearing over and over again in our committee. Kids can't wait. You can't park a kid for 3 weeks and say, well, we don't have quality care, we don't have consistent care for you right now, so just, I don't know what you're going to do. Sorry, kid, you're on hold. We can't do anything for you. Kids can't wait. Every day an infant is in childcare is a day of their brain development. And if we are not addressing what their needs are, if they are not getting that quality care and learning, that stability in their lives, those are days that we can't get back. Those are days those children have missed. And what I want to come to is one of the biggest opportunity gaps that we have in Minnesota starts at this young age. We know that, as we have fallen behind other states in how we support our child care industry through these child care assistant payments, when we're down there at the bottom, at the 25th percentile, instead of where we should be at the 75th, which is what the federal government recommends, that means that kids have not been getting consistent quality care because the rates are not high enough to afford it. And you should be taking a look at our counties that support this. And I do want to highlight two from Minnesota Prenatal to 3 Coalition. One of their sentences and their conclusion is, when payment rates are too low, providers are less likely to serve families receiving child care assistance. When the rates are too low, providers are turning families away. So with this bill, when we improve these rates and bring them up to where the market is, we know that more families can get child care assistance that's quality and consistent because the providers can afford to take those kids. It's not that hard. All right, so who are we helping with this bill? We are helping working parents. Working parents. Those kids, we're helping those kids. We're helping the parents stay in the workforce. And the ones that are getting child care assistance, that are eligible for child care assistance, they are low-wage workers. But they're also the backbone of our workforce. And if we want to talk about nursing homes, one of the problems in nursing homes is they can't hire workers. One of the reasons they can't hire workers is because they're parents and they can't afford child care. So this is part of our economy, but it's helping the most at risk. It's helping our kids, our next generation of citizens in Minnesota when they most need it. And it's helping those families stay on the job and to know that their children, just like what I was looking for when I was a parent a long time ago, those kids are going to have a safe, nurturing place for their early care and learning. So thanks for bringing this bill.
I recognize the member from Crow Wing, Representative Heisman.
Thank you, Speaker. Members, I don't often speak to this subject area, but today I'm going to rise, and there's a couple of things that I think that need to be addressed yet that haven't been in this chamber. Representative Garofalo actually covered it in Ways and Means, but it really hasn't been brought up yet today. I think it is fair to say that this particular legislation is heavy on promises, especially when you listen to the rhetoric that's been being discussed in this chamber, and light on delivery. This problem with the CPAP program and fraud goes back quite a ways, and it's nice there has been some opportunity to address that mildly, I'll just say. But there's some serious problems yet still being discussed in this chamber, and amendments that were brought by Representative Daniels to try to bring some guardrails to this program are not allowed to move forward. Representative Garofalo brought up in the Ways and Means Committee the fact that there are still individuals receiving payments under the CCAP program that are currently under indictment, Chair Pinto. What's going on? And every time this issue is brought up, Representative Pinto, the answer is, well, it can be addressed by the agency. Why not allow amendments that could verify participation in that program to go on the bill? What are Democrats afraid of? I'm frustrated that we're still talking about this bill in the context of, well, that's something that we could work on. We've offered an opportunity to re-refer it back to committee. No, we can't do that. It's full steam ahead. Members, this bill is not ready. Not while there's still payments going to folks that are under indictment in the CCAP program. Members, vote no.
I recognize the member from Polk, Representative Keel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't serve in child care, and it's been a little while since I've actually taken care of little ones, well, other than my grandchildren. But I'm a little concerned about this conversation about the fraud that doesn't get investigated. And I hear all the time we need more money for child care, which I can understand and appreciate the fact that it costs and costs a lot. But in my district, in the last year, I have had 3 child care providers that have wanted to get up and running. One was in a smaller town. The business owners said, hey, we'll get the building going. We found a child care provider. We'll do all the work that needs to be done to get the building ready. We'll fund it. We'll back it. But guess what? They waited and waited for approval. Waited for DHS to answer. I called often and said, what's going on? Oh, it's on a desk. We're looking at it shortly. But it took forever. And the businessmen look at me and go, if it wasn't for the issue of permitting with DHS, they would have been open 6 months at least earlier. What did they need? They had half of the approval. They were waiting for the fire marshal to come and approve it. It still took months. I would say the DHS needs to work on its efficiency to make sure that this is done. In Crookston, I have families, 41 spots. We just found out we are going to have infant care. It has taken them over a year. Business owner is in the district, but has one already in North Dakota, long time ago running. And now she's been having some Crookston people drive their children, that's at least 30 miles, over to the child care provider, dropped their children off, gone back to Crookston. So that's an hour, that's 60 minutes to drive over and back, and then they go to work, and of course, at the end of the day, the same thing happens. They have to go and get the children and bring them home. They're pretty excited because the open house is next week, and they will have that child care. Why did it take a year? Once again, the permits were hung up in DHS. And they know about this. I've called them. I've asked them. But I think there's more than money involved here. If we have clear messages between each other, because the providers know that they have to do certain things and the regulation. But this latest one took over a year, and it was set in a school setting that is open. They happen to have a couple of classrooms they're going to rent to the child care provider, and so much of the building is ready to go. It didn't take them much. But Representative Pinto, I think this is something that we have to address. Where is DHS with all of this? Why are they not making sure there is no fraud? Why are they not making sure that these permits are not being handled? I mean, when I call, it takes weeks to get a response. And certainly the people that I talk to are, we'll look for it, we'll check. We went back and forth, unbelievable times. And I just think there is more to this issue than funding. Funding is certainly important. It helps our young families out. But if we're dealing with fraud, it's really sad because we're taking away from those families. Fraud is taking away from children. It is taking away from those parents. And that needs to be addressed. So I can't vote for a bill that we don't know about the fraud yet. We need to check that first. Thank you, members.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Coulter.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pretty new around here. There are a lot of folks in this chamber that I don't know very well.
And while at last count, I think I've been to 74 or 75 counties in the state of Minnesota, I certainly can't claim to know every district very well. But I'm willing to bet, Mr. Speaker, I am willing to bet that every single one of us has talked about childcare at least once in the last year. Maybe it's because you're like me and I see other members of the body and you're a parent of young kids struggling with trying to figure out how to make it all work with limited time, money, and especially energy. And in fact, one of the first conversations I had with Chair Lislegard was to tell him that I was going to have to miss a portion of property taxes almost every week so that I could run and pick up my daughter. Now, fortunately, my wife and I were able to make other arrangements so I don't have to do that. Maybe you've heard about it from local leaders and businesses like I did at a recent chamber event, who know that lack of affordable, accessible childcare is a huge piece of the worker shortage. Maybe you've heard from providers in your community who love their jobs, but are finding it harder and harder to do them because they don't make enough to support themselves and their families, even as so many of us in this room right now over the last few years called them literal heroes. Representative Perez Vega called them warriors, which I really love. Whatever the context, it should be extremely clear to all of us that childcare is a center of life issue for every single person in this state. In fact, I believe that access to quality, affordable childcare is one of the greatest economic and social issues we face today. It undergirds almost everything we need or want to do. Now, it's disappointing to me that there are some here who either don't recognize how important this issue is, how center of life this is for so many of our constituents, or at least are just not committed to taking the steps needed to make a difference. We've heard specious attempts to link this bill to something else entirely. We've heard numbers thrown around that are charitably described as unsubstantiated, that were called, and I'm quoting, assumptions, conjecture, leaps of logic that had no basis at all by the individual who, for nearly 40 years, ran our nonpartisan office that investigates exactly these kinds of claims, even when the person making the claims was put under oath. Now, to be fair, there were some real flaws exposed that the legislature, in a bipartisan way, took steps and made investments to address, and that we continue to address in this bill. And I want to thank Chair Pinto for continuing to do this work. But now, though, we are essentially taking DHS to task for being unable to prove something for which there is no evidence doesn't exist. I know personally, I wouldn't be comfortable basing my vote on that kind of intellectual dishonesty and logical fallacy. And I don't know how I justify that to my constituents. Frankly, I'm not even sure I could justify that to my wife, though admittedly she's always been a pretty hard to persuade voter. Now, clearly there is bipartisan recognition of the need for more funding for our early care and education system in Minnesota. I am deeply grateful that Representatives Daniels and Hudson and Nelson and Zalesnikar all spoke powerfully to nearly $1 billion in new spending on early care and education in my bill just last week. And I will admit I'm a little uncomfortable with some of the praise that's been thrown its way this week, but there's still plenty of room for co-authors on House File 1277 if folks are interested. And with the full-on crisis that we face in childcare right now, and the systems and resources we have available to us, there is simply no good reason not to do this. Now, I think we should be extremely clear about what this bill does for ourselves and for the dozens of people watching at home. At its core, this is actually a pretty simple concept. Minnesotans help pay childcare providers to ensure that working families with lower incomes can still take care of their kids. How much we pay them, as has been said, is based on a market survey. And this is where I get really fired up. Because right now, our process is that we take that survey and essentially say to childcare providers, because you are caring for kids who already come from challenging circumstances, whose families, by definition, have less money, we want you to make less than 60 to 70% of your peers. This, in addition to the fact that child care providers are already among the most poorly paid professionals out there. From any perspective, does that make sense? If we were to ask our constituents, would they say that it does? This bill takes an initial step to ensure that child care providers, the workforce behind the workforce, aren't paid poverty wages to help some of our kids who need it the most. There is much more that we need to do to address the serious child care crisis we face, and there is more coming. And yes, I absolutely agree that there are needed changes to regulations. I agree that sometimes we do need to streamline and make just more common sense enforcement available. That is absolutely important. But to not support this bill, especially based on some of the arguments that our colleagues have laid out here, to me is just baffling. Supporting this bill shows Minnesotans that we are serious, that we are focused on doing the work that we were sent here to do. This is literally one of the issues I ran on because I have seen firsthand, and I see every single day, how center of life this issue is for folks in Bloomington and all over our state. If you agree that it is of critical importance to get every Minnesota kid off to a great start, I hope you'll join me by voting yes. Thank you.
I recognize the member from Mower, Representative Mueller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I appreciate that last comment. Let's explain what this bill will do. Well, let me explain what this bill will not do. This bill will not follow the recommendations from the 2019 Child Care Task Force. The 2019 Child Care Task Force said that we as a legislature need to be looking at our regulations when it comes to inspections and licensing. Matter of fact, recommendation 2 from the 2019 Minnesota Task Force said, surveys reviewed by the task force show that the loss of thousands of licensed family child care providers over the last decade is predominantly due to the burdensome regulations, licensing inconsistencies, and increased paperwork. Providers have requested clear expectations, consistency, and fairness in enforcement of the rules and regulations in place to protect them. Members, this bill is continuing to give money that will not address the actual problem of price increase. This bill continues to give money to a system that has already been shown to be burdensome on our child care family providers. I too have talked to my child care family child care providers. We've had a meeting together. We've talked together. We have gone through the budget together. We've gone through the task force thing together. And we have looked at how we can help best provide for our family child care providers. And this is what they're asking for. And the task force said it, showed it, gave us recommendations on what we should be doing, explained in detail what legislators should be doing. It says the legislative action, legislation for full and abbreviated licensing review based on statistically significant key indicators that predict full compliance with all applicable rules and statutes. Development of a risk-based, data-driven, tiered violation system with corresponding enforcement mechanisms that are appropriate to the risk presented by the violation. This bill doesn't address any of that. This bill doesn't address the actual root cause of why it's so expensive anyway. Yes, we have to have as many choices and as many possibilities for our families because that's what they want. They want to be able to decide which child care place that they can go to. And more are being pushed out, not because of the lack of money, but because of what government is doing to them by asking them to follow more and more regulations, more and more rules, and more burdensome compliance that the 2019 task force has told us that we need to roll back. Until we see a bill that tells us that we're going to actually look at regulations and change that, I ask members to vote red.
I recognize the member from Wright, Representative Hudson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Where to begin? So we have assurances from DHS that everything's going to be okay. Last week, we had a joint committee meeting between Children and Families and Education Finance, where we were presented with a report from the Office of Legislative Auditor that concluded that their term was pervasive non-compliance with grant management policies. Pervasive non-compliance. Now, that's a term that we'll come back to here momentarily, but before we do, and by the way, just to link it to the assurances that we're getting from the agencies, the OLA was looking at and auditing DHS and MDE. So what we have here in this handout that was provided to us is assurance from the very same agency that the OLA just told us is in pervasive non-compliance, that everything's going to be okay. We got nothing to worry about. You'll forgive me for not taking that particularly seriously. I want to speak to some of the things that have been said by members in the majority tonight, particularly when it comes to playing on our emotions regarding the care of children and the people who provide it. Representative Pryor said that the goal here is to provide consistent quality care for children. Representative Perez Vega referred to child care providers and their employees as warriors, accused us of not valuing them, implied that we don't have their backs. Well, let me give you a couple examples of these warriors that we're talking about. The CCAP Investigations Unit Manager, Jay Swanson, indicated, amongst other things, that there was seized video during the investigation into the 2018 CCAP fraud. Seized video systems showing repeated situations of children not being supervised by the employees. Repeated situations of children not being supervised by the employees. These are your warriors. These are the folks whose backs we don't have. Maybe it's because they don't have ours. Maybe it's because they don't have the backs of our children. You want to argue over the amount of CCAP fraud from 2018? Okay, let's argue about it. First of all, let's take the assumption, again, pointing back to CCAP Investigations Unit Manager Jay Swanson. He indicated that fraud levels reached almost 50% of total CCAP expenditures, including both fraudulent billing and failing to provide the care and services required by law. In other words, people standing around not doing much, as was previously criticized. Jay Swanson thinks it's legitimate. He also expressed concerns with up to 100 child care centers billing the state $108 million in fiscal year 2017 alone. $108 million, that's his number. We've been conservative, just claiming 100. He says 50%, but even if you take our number of 100, that's 40%. That means 4 in 10 child care providers in 2018 were conducting themselves fraudulently. Now, let's accept, let's be generous. Let's accept that maybe we're wrong, maybe Jay Swanson is wrong. Maybe the investigators have looked into this and said that they generally agreed with the estimate of the extent and value of the fraud, that they too are wrong. And let's do a generous reduction of the estimate. Let's say it was only 50 million instead of 100 million. Well, that's still 20%. It means you can trust child care center to not be fraudulent by the narrow definition of fraud that is applied. You can trust that 8 out of 10 times. So you got a pretty decent chance. It's better than a coin flip. It's pretty good. But it still means that 2 times out of 10, we were throwing good money after bad to the tune of $50 million. Let's be generous again. Let's cut that in half. Let's say it was only 25 million, only 10%, only 1 out of 10. Starting to look pretty good. 90%, that's an A, right? A minus. Doing all right. but this is the care of children that we're talking about here. Is 10% an acceptable failure rate when it comes to the care of children? When it comes to, because let's be clear about what we're talking about. We're talking about accepting payment. That's what fraud is, accepting payment for a service that you are not providing. And we're talking about people who we know were willing to do that. They were willing to take your money, they were willing to take your constituents' money under the auspices that they were going to care for children and then not actually do that. So even if we're extraordinarily generous and cut the estimate from 100 million down to 25, you're still talking about 10%. And you know, we could do this all night. We'll cut it down to, we'll be really generous, 5%, 12.5 million. Now, 12.5 million is a lot of money. It's a lot of money to any Minnesotan. I don't care who you are. The idea that we would just let that go out the door, that we would erect a system that lets that money go out the door fraudulently to people who are acting in bad faith, to my mind, is unconscionable. And, you know, I think all of this kind of misses the point, because if you're going to sit and debate over what the amount was it 100, was it 50, was it 25, was it 12.5, the fact that we're having the debate reveals the real point, which is here we are 5 years later and we don't know. How do we not know? How is it that we came through this process, through a deliberative process, how do we come up with a system that enabled any of these possibilities, let alone the $108 million that Jay Swanson says was fraud, out of $254 million? How's that possible? Well, I'll tell you how it's possible. It's because of that pervasive noncompliance that the OLA identified last week. What pervasive noncompliance means is that people aren't bothering to do their job. Representative Anu asked the question, why do we never bother to check? Well, I'll tell you why. It's real simple. Lack of incentive. Why would you want to know? Why would you care? Why would you want to find out? Where's the incentive? It's not your money, it's taxpayer money. You're only rocking the boat to turn over that rock and find out what lurks beneath it. There's no incentives in place for compliance with grant management practices. You know where there is incentive to assure quality? In the marketplace. We have this mechanism of price, and in children and families, and even offline, Chairman Pinto has an open invitation to me to engage with him on debate regarding economic theory, and I really do actually look forward to taking him up on that at some point. But I'll start it here, right? I'll start the opening salvo, and then we can work off of that later. And that is this, you know, the argument as I understand it, the argument as it has been presented for why the state needs to interfere in this transaction, why the state needs to come between consumers and producers, between parents and their students and child care providers. The reason why we need to do that is because of this theory that there's a true cost, some ethereal true cost of child care that is not accurately reflected in market prices. And so our task is to make that true cost manifest and cover it by just throwing money at the system. And if that is indeed the theory, I'll at least grant you this much. This makes sense through the worldview of that theory. The idea that it doesn't matter how much money we throw at it. In fact, the more the merrier. We'll even let there be some fraud on the side. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't really apply, because what we're really getting after is trying to raise up the real value, the true value of the service beyond what price will give us. The problem with that is that price functions as quality control. If you remove the downward pressure on price, it's only going to keep going up. And that's what this is going to do. By going up to 75% from 40, by further subsidizing the price of childcare, you're only going to cause the overall price to go up. It'll be subsidized, it'll be spread across taxpayers, but we collectively, we are going to be paying more for it. And maybe that's the goal, I don't know. But it's certainly not worth pursuing careless, reckless policy that empowers folks to do things like this gal who ran SAFA Childcare in Bloomington. Nonprofit called Action for East African People claimed to feed 6,400 children. Claimed to. With one major problem: one of the food distribution sites didn't exist. Now that strikes me as a red flag, right? You say you got a distribution site, it's not there. I mean, it's in the physical world, right? So all you got to do to verify that it exists is drive by it, send somebody to it, take a look. We apparently didn't do that. According to the Minnesota Reformer, several of these sponsored sites were also the same locations for sites sponsored by other nonprofits reporting separate meal distribution operations from the same location. So multiple nonprofits saying that they're taking care of kids at a location that doesn't exist. It's a pretty big red flag. The individual who ran it, her name was Ms. Abakar, was also the CEO for a child care center, SAFA Child Care Center and Learning in Bloomington, which saw its license revoked in September of 2019 for providing false and misleading information and failure to comply with licensing laws and rules. In April of 2020, a new child care center popped up, Valley Learning Center, which was licensed to operate at the exact same address. Again, red flag. What's going on? Business CEO listed with that business with the Secretary of State was a known associate of Ms. Abukar, who had her corporate headquarters at the very same address for both her former and current child care center in Bloomington. So all of this stuff is, what this is indicative of is the brazenness. And we saw this, right? When we saw people get up who were perpetrators, who are under indictment, talk about what they were doing, there was no sense of shame. There was no sense of regret. I mean, we heard about some of the things that were done with this money, and more recently with the $250 million in Feeding Our Future fraud, going on vacations, buying houses. And again, these are people doing this under the auspices of feeding and caring for children. What kind of a person do you have to be to do that? Well, I'll tell you one thing, you're the kind of person who I don't want watching my kid. This bill doubles down on bad policies that have demonstrably negative results for taxpayers, for children, for parents. And I'll tell you, we have a model that works. Representative Coulter spoke to the bipartisan support of his bill, House File 1277, and children and families. Yeah, the reason why is because it was right in alignment with the amendment that I offered earlier today. Provided additional funding for early childhood scholarships. It reinforced, it leveraged that mechanism of price, the input of parents, their inherent ability to control quality because it's their kid and money that they have stewardship over. Those are powerful incentives that ensure you don't run into things like children not being supervised by the employees. Parent has to see that one time and they take their money and they go somewhere else. It's not going to happen to the tune of 5, 10, 20, 40%. This reminds me of our reading outcomes, 60 to 70% of children not able to read at grade level. And, we're going to hear bills coming down the pike to just pour more money into that system, too. Failure should be an indicator of course correction. But for some reason, once you get the government involved, it's often rewarded. And that's what we're doing here today. Vote no, please.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Katiza Wattoon.
Speaker, this may be dating myself, but my favorite Christmas movie is Miracle on 34th Street. Not the original, but the 1994 version. If you haven't seen it, the basic plot is that a department store in New York has hired a Santa Claus, who the audience learns is the real Santa Claus. But a rival department store stages an attack on him and takes him to court, asking him to prove that he is the real Santa Claus. But they are equally unable to prove that he isn't the real Santa Claus. Now, members, this is a lot like the wild accusations of fraud back in the day, before a number of us were even serving in the legislature, before Chair Pinto's Early Childhood Finance and Policy Committee took active steps, bipartisan action with our colleagues in the the Republican Senate to address program integrity. Representative Pryor detailed the handout from DHS on many of the changes that we have implemented over the past 4 years. You've asked us to prove that $100 million of fraud didn't occur, but you have no proof that anywhere near that amount occurred. And meanwhile, you're reading off a bunch of examples of how DHS shut down fraudulent providers in order to prove that our program integrity measures don't work. That's weird. We've taken bipartisan action to address this, and this bill includes additional action to address this. It is detrimental to the children and families and small businesses of Minnesota to continue starving a program of critical resources when 99% of people are doing the right thing, and 1% might not be. We're not okay with that. That's why we can continue to improve integrity and oversight, and we can continue to move forward with much needed investment in this program. Members, here are some of the states that currently have higher reimbursement rates than Minnesota: South Dakota, North Dakota, Iowa, Wisconsin. We hear a lot about people moving over the border from our friends on the other side of the aisle. Maybe that's where some of our child care providers are going, because they're actually getting paid what they are worth, or closer to it. Alabama, Arkansas, Florida, Louisiana, West Virginia, and the list goes on. Members, research shows us time and time again that there is no better return on investment than early care and learning. Some studies show upwards of a 16-to-1 return. So members, if you're concerned about the best use of taxpayer dollars, if you're concerned about workforce shortages, if you're concerned about the future of our state, vote green.
I recognize the member from Rice, Representative Daniels.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Well, this has been a lively debate. I won't go over all the points that were made. Thank you, Representative Hudson, for bringing to light all the deficiencies in the program, all the intentional fraud that's there. When we were talking to the Inspector General in committee, I asked her what that amount was that they suspected of fraud, and I never got a dollar amount. And then at that time in committee, we asked how many ongoing investigations. We never got an answer for that either. But she did email me a couple of hours later and said there was 40 ongoing investigations. So this isn't over. On January 17th, the Children and Families Committee was given a very rosy review of the success of the program integrity measures adopted in 2019. This left the impression that those measures were working to prohibit fraud and abuse. On February 6th, the Ways and Means Committee added a new integrity measure to the bill that were not heard or discussed in Children and Families Committee. Now, that confirms our suspicions that those measures have failed and fraud continues to be pervasive. I could go on and on with all the stories, but I think everybody's heard them for years now. Since 2017, this has been going on. So, Chair Pinto, my hat's off to you. I I like working with you. I know you have a good heart, but with meaningful fraud and fraud measures, this bill will simply help to fully fund fraud. So members with a regretful heart, I ask you to vote no. Thank you.
The member from Stearns, Representative Demuth.
Thank you, Speaker Hortman and members. As we've heard in this chamber a little bit, people have kind of taken us down memory lane. I'm just going to do that briefly, just for one more minute here. I want to take you back to 2018 when the Child Care Assistance Program, also known as CCAP, was rocked by the allegations of fraud exceeding $100 million. While the full extent of the fraud was never itemized or determined, fraud investigators working with the Department of Human Services did agree that there was $100 million, and that was an accurate assessment. Unfortunately, we will never know the true scope of the cost of fraud. What we know for a fact, though, is fraud is real and is more pervasive than the agency would ever admit or could determine. So while downplaying the reality of fraud in the program, the majority in 2019 passed several program integrity measures to plug the leaking holes and try to restore taxpayer confidence. As recently as January 17th of this year, the Inspector General gave an assessment of the success of those measures and expressed confidence that the prevalent cases of fraud were a problem of the past. This confidence in the program integrity was echoed by the chair of Children and Families Committee. But unfortunately, the reality is becoming too obvious to ignore, as the massive Feeding Our Future scam had obvious overlaps into the CCAP and other DHS-managed programs. Despite the public assurances of those measures adopted in 2019, if they were working, on February 6th, in the Committee on Ways and Means, an amendment adding more integrity measures suddenly appeared out of nowhere, just one day before the Star Tribune would report on February 7th that DHS has revoked the licenses for 2 adult daycare centers controlled by individuals involved and indicted in the Feeding Our Future scam. We will assume that that was just a coincidence, that the majority didn't have prior knowledge of the breaking news. But too often the majority response to fraud is to deny or downplay the problem or simply explain it away as harmless bookkeeping errors. By lumping waste, fraud, and abuse together with the DFL, the DFL implies that mismanaging taxpayer funds is the same as schemes to steal taxpayer funds. So why does fraud and abuse matter? Why should we care about $100 million here, $250 million there? Because as unbelievable as these figures sound, the true scope of fraud is exponentially worse. So I served as a member of the Early Childhood Committee for 4 years, and we often heard that there is an expected return on investment for the funds that we are able to put forward for early care and learning of children. In the committee, we often hear that it can range from 8% to 13%. However, the return on investment does cut both ways, and money not gained is also money lost. Let's use a conservative rate of return. So that $100 million in fraud and abuse is already worth more than $150 million. And over the next 50 years, the long-term costs of CCAP fraud could be more than $5 billion. I'll say that again. That is $5 billion in stolen opportunities for children and future costs for taxpayers. And that $250 million stolen by Feeding Our Future is a long-term loss of more than $12 billion. So combine those two, That's more than $17 billion, almost the size of our current surplus, in future dividends lost and added costs to be carried by current and future taxpayers. This session, we also learned that the majority believes there is a magic money tree. Unfortunately, they are right, but it is a money tree of fraud. Under failed leadership and lax oversight, Feeding Our Future had a magic money tree worth more than $250 million. And those willing to steal money intended to provide care or food to children and vulnerable adults still have that magic money tree of fraud. But neither the taxpayers nor honest business owners have a money tree. They just have a higher tax bill. We hear that money always flows faster than investigation and bureaucracy. So members, it is time to stop fully funding fraud and take meaningful measures to protect taxpayers and the children who rely on effective programs serving their best interests. So members, until we actually get serious about the issue of fraud, vote no.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Long.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm learning that there is a bit of a theme this session in some of our floor debates, which is that if we can't fix the entire problem all at once, we shouldn't fix part of it. And if that was our standard, then no bill could ever meet it, and why would we bother showing up for work? We know that affordable child care is an issue all over the state. We've heard from colleagues on both sides of the aisle today that this is important and that this is something we need to address. We know that the cost of child care in Minnesota is among the most expensive in the nation. It is as expensive to send a child to child care on average in the state of Minnesota as it is first-year tuition at the University of Minnesota. We know that this is a top reason for our workforce shortage and that we need to provide more affordable child care so that people can get back to work. At our first presser on the first budget rollout and our first event as leaders, Leader Damon said that child care was a bipartisan issue and something that we wanted to work on together. We know this is a problem. We know this is something where we should be able to work together and address it on a bipartisan basis. This bill is really straightforward. It increases the reimbursement for CCAP for one of our great programs that is providing access for low-income Minnesotans to child care to the federal guidelines. That's it. If the payment is too low, providers are less likely to serve families who are on this program. This is about access for low-income families. This is about living wages for child care providers. This is about helping child care centers stay open. My 4-year-old loves her pre-K teachers. Boy, is she learning a lot from them. She comes home every day and tells me about what she did, how excited she was. She's always excited to go back to pre-K. But boy, are her teachers underpaid. They deserve a heck of a lot more than they are getting right now, as do all of our child care and early childhood teachers in the state. Hopefully there is no disagreement in this chamber on that point, that we should be paying these hardworking individuals more money. Only 12 states have worse rates for infant care than Minnesota does. So hopefully we can all agree that moving our CCAP reimbursement rates to match the federal guidelines is something we should all do. So then let's set that aside. If this is just about fraud, if you care about fraud, well then guess what? Since 2018, when a lot of the data was being cited, we took significant action in 2019. That seems to all have been wiped away or forgotten. But set that aside. This bill itself is expanding the tools that DHS has to deal with fraud. It authorizes the DHS to cut off when there are credible allegations of fraud. These are new tools that we will be providing to DHS to deal with fraud. So if you care about fraud and you want to take significant action, then you should be voting for this bill. We also were willing to work together on the amendments that were authored by the minority. We often hear, you're not willing to take our amendments. Well, guess what? We were willing to take them today with some very minor amendments, but they were withdrawn. At some point, you have to wonder if it's better to keep the talking point alive or if we really want to work together to address this problem. This bill is about the lack of affordable childcare that is holding parents back from working, holding businesses back from hiring, and holding kids back from getting a great start to live. So let's vote green to support our child care providers families, and most importantly, our kids. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The member from Ramsey, the author of the bill, Representative Pinto.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, members. Thank you, Leader Long, for that great summary, I think, of where things stand. I think I've learned in the last couple of hours that debate on the House floor, maybe I should have known this, does not actually need to be tethered to fact or to reality. Members, I'll take a little journey down memory lane. The 2019 OLA report, we've heard this number of $100 million. Quote, we did not find evidence to substantiate the allegation of that level of fraud. The OLA report found that 4 years ago. So what did we do? We passed, as Leader Long said, a series of reforms to the program, distributed to everybody in this chamber. Multiple changes. This bill, as Leader Long just said, contains a series of provisions. I didn't walk through them so much at the beginning because I kind of thought we'd get into them in more detail. I think Leader Long summarized them quite well. By voting for this bill, when you do that, you will be voting to give DHS additional authority to cut off fraudsters. If you vote against this bill, you are voting against additional authority for DHS to cut off fraudsters, people committing fraud in other state programs, in federal programs. That is the question before you. That is the opportunity in HF 13. It's ironic, I have to say, members, I often hear this from members of the minority. I heard this in the discussion today. Even as we talk all about this, we also complain the regulations are too burdensome. Too burdensome on the one hand, and then on the other hand, we need to have more regulations. And I struggle with this. I hope members remember that right now, there is regulation reform efforts going on that we have funded, working with family child care providers, child care centers. But we have to ultimately make a decision about where we stand and decide, are we in fact going to take these issues seriously? Are we going to provide the opportunity to, as was said at one point, we're just letting money go out the door. I think I heard somebody say that. If you feel that way, you will vote green, because this gives power to stop that. What is the evidence that DHS will in fact exercise the authority? Your own list of DHS exercising that authority. I think what bothers me the most, though, in all this is that the true threat to the integrity of the CCAP program is our failure to actually do what we're supposed to do with the CCAP program. You heard Representative Katiz-Watun say this. All the states around us have higher rates than we do. They're actually compensating the people who do this critical work in the way that they actually should be compensated. It is time for Minnesota to join them. It is time to pass this bill for kids, for families, for whatever concerns that you may have for program integrity. Let's vote green. Let's make it happen. Thank you.
The clerk will take the roll on the bill. Will the clerk please call the name of the member who is voting remotely?
Agbaje.
Okay, here you go.
Agbaje votes yes.
Agbaje votes aye.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 69 ayes and 59 nays, the bill is passed and its title agreed to. Motions and resolutions. There are copies of the non-controversial motions at the House desk and online. If there is no objection, we'll take action on these motions first. Hearing no objection, the motions prevail.
Pryor moves that House File Number 112, now in the General Register, be re-referred to the Committee on Education Finance.
Representative Pryor, to your motion.
Yes, House File 112 is relating to delaying the review of the physical education standards. It looks like it should also be heard in Ed Finance, and so we'd like to refer it there, and the chair gives the okay.
Any discussion on the prior motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, please say no. The motion prevails.
Richardson moves that House File number 1280 be recalled from the Committee on Workforce Development, Finance, and Policy and be re-referred to the Committee on Economic Development, Finance, and Policy.
Representative Richardson, to your motion.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. That is my motion. House File number 1280 appropriates funds to the Center for Economic Inclusion, and it needs to be heard in the Committee on Economic Development, Finance, and Policy. I've spoken to both chairs, and they are in agreement.
Any discussion on the Richardson motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, please say no. Motion prevails. Announcements. The member from Ramsey, Representative Zhang.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Last Friday, a young student attending Harding High School in 9th District's life was taken too soon. I spent the weekend speaking with community members, students, and staff who are grieving. I'd like to ask for a moment of silence for the victim's family and the Harding High School community.
Members, please rise for a moment of silence for the fallen student and the community. Representative Long.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise to note that former Representative Lee Greenfield of Minneapolis, who served in our chamber from 1979 to 2000, passed away on Tuesday, February 7th, 2023. Representative Greenfield served those 11 terms in the Minnesota House and was a true champion of disability rights. He was active in the civil rights and anti-war movements in the 1960s. And his activism was well recognized by many Minnesotans, and so I would ask that we rise for a moment of silence.
Members, please rise for a moment of silence for former State Representative Lee Greenfield. Announcements. Any further announcements? Representative Long.
Madam Speaker, I move that when the House adjourns today, it adjourns until 10:10 a.m. Wednesday, February 15th, 2023.
Representative Long moves that when the House adjourns today, it adjourns until 10:10 a.m. Wednesday, February 15th, 2023. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, please say no. The motion prevails. Representative Long.
Madam Speaker, I move that the House do now adjourn.
Representative Long moves that the House do now adjourn. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, please say no. The motion prevails. The House stands adjourned until 10:10 Wednesday, February 15th, 2023.